Born Madison Marie on April 3, 1985, Madison's childhood was steeped in the idyllic charm of small-town America. Her parents raised her with a blend of love, discipline, and appreciation for the arts. From an early age, Madison displayed a voracious appetite for literature. Her parents nurtured this passion, filling their modest home with books and encouraging Madison's academic pursuits. As she blossomed into a teenager, Madison's intelligence and beauty made her a popular figure at Pine Haven High School, though she often preferred the company of books to that of her peers. It was during her senior year that Madison met Caspian Alwyn, a charismatic transfer student with dreams of becoming a journalist. Caspian's quick wit and shared love of literature quickly captured Madison's heart. Their whirlwind romance became the talk of the town, with many predicting a bright future for the young couple. After graduating high school, Madison and Caspian both attended the University of Oregon. Madison pursued a degree in library science, while Caspian studied journalism. Their college years were marked by late-night study sessions, passionate debates about literature, and dreams of a life filled with adventure and intellectual pursuits. Upon graduation, the couple returned to Pine Haven. Madison secured a position at the local library, quickly working her way up to head librarian. Caspian, however, struggled to find fulfilling work in the small town. His dreams of becoming an investigative journalist seemed increasingly out of reach in the quiet confines of Pine Haven. On a crisp autumn day, Madison and Caspian exchanged vows in a picturesque ceremony at the Pine Haven Community Church. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of two of its brightest young stars. For a time, it seemed that Madison had achieved the perfect life, a fulfilling career, a loving husband, and the respect of her community. But as the years passed, cracks began to appear in the facade of their perfect marriage. Caspian grew restless and resentful, feeling trapped in Pine Haven. Madison, devoted to her work in her hometown, couldn't understand his discontent. The couple's once vibrant conversations devolved into tense silences and bitter arguments. Little did Madison know that this first taste of marital discord was merely a prelude to the turmoil that lay ahead. The unraveling of Madison and Caspian's marriage was a slow, painful process that played out over the course of 2 years. Caspian's frustration with small-town life and his unfulfilled ambitions led him to become increasingly withdrawn and irritable. He began spending more time at the local bar, drowning his sorrows and lamenting his unrealized dreams to anyone who would listen. Madison, for her part, threw herself into her work at the library, organizing reading programs for children and spearheading a digital archiving project for the town's historical documents. She clung to the hope that if she could just make their life in Pine Haven perfect enough, Caspian would rediscover his love for her and their shared life. The breaking point came in the spring of 2013, when Caspian announced that he had accepted a junior reporter position at a small newspaper in Seattle. He delivered this news not with excitement, but with a sense of grim finality. "Madison, we're done here. I can't do this anymore. I'm suffocating in this town and I won't let it kill my dreams." Madison was devastated. She pleaded with Caspian to reconsider, to give their marriage another chance. But his mind was made up. Within a week, he had packed his belongings and left Pine Haven, leaving Madison alone in the house they had once hoped to fill with children and laughter. The divorce proceedings were mercifully quick, but the emotional toll on Madison was immense. She retreated into herself, finding solace in her books and her work. The once vivacious woman became a shadow of her former self, her smile now tinged with sadness, her eyes carrying the weight of her heartbreak. For 2 years, Madison lived in a state of emotional limbo, going through the motions of her daily life while nursing the wounds of her failed marriage. Little did she know that fate was about to deal her another hand, one that would lead her down a path she could never have imagined. It was on a rain-soaked Tuesday in April 2015 that Silas Qualley first walked into the Pine Haven Public Library. With his tall frame, Silas cut an impressive figure. He approached Madison's desk with a warm smile, introducing himself as the new high school English teacher. Silas had recently moved to Pine Haven from Portland, seeking a change of pace after the end of his own long-term relationship. As he and Madison began to discuss their shared love of literature, a spark of connection ignited between them. For the first time in years, Madison felt the flutter of excitement in her chest. Over the following weeks, Silas became a regular at the library, often staying until closing time to chat with Madison. Their conversations ranged from passionate debates about the merits of various authors to quiet confidences about their past relationships and hopes for the future. Silas's gentle humor and obvious admiration began to chip away at the walls Madison had built around her heart. The whirlwind romance that followed was the talk of the town. Madison bloomed under Silas's attention, regaining the vibrancy that had dimmed during her years with Caspian. Silas, for his part, seemed utterly devoted to Madison, showering her with affection and romantic gestures. Just 6 months after their first meeting, Silas proposed on the very same spot in the park where they had their first date. Madison, caught up in the intoxicating rush of new love, accepted without hesitation. The couple married in a small, intimate ceremony at the Pinehaven Botanical Gardens, with Madison's parents and a handful of close friends in attendance. As Madison and Silas exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse, neither could have foreseen the storms that lay ahead. For Madison, it seemed that life had given her a second chance at happiness, but fate, as she would learn, had other plans. The first 2 years of Madison and Silas's marriage seemed to be plucked from the pages of a romance novel. They settled into a charming home on Maple Street, just a short walk from both the library and the high school. Weekends were filled with antiquing trips to neighboring towns, cozy evenings spent reading aloud to each other, and dinner parties with their growing circle of friends. Silas quickly became a beloved figure at Pinehaven High School, his innovative teaching methods and genuine interest in his students earning him the admiration of both pupils and parents alike. Madison beamed with pride whenever she heard people praising her husband's dedication and charm. At home, Silas was attentive and affectionate. He surprised Madison with breakfast in bed on Sunday mornings, left little love notes in her lunch bag, and never failed to ask about her day. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect couple, a shining example of mature, devoted love. Yet, as the initial glow of their honeymoon phase began to fade, subtle signs of discord started to emerge. Silas began to work later hours, citing the need to prepare for his classes and grade papers. While Madison initially accepted this as part of his commitment to his job, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of loneliness on the nights when she ate dinner alone. There were other small changes, too. Silas became more protective of his phone, often taking calls in another room or quickly putting it away when Madison entered. He started going to the gym more frequently, paying increased attention to his appearance. When Madison commented on these changes, Silas brushed off her concerns with a laugh and a kiss. Despite these niggling doubts, Madison was determined to believe in the strength of their relationship. She threw herself into being the perfect wife, planning elaborate date nights and surprising Silas with thoughtful gifts. If she sometimes felt that his responses to her efforts were a bit forced, she pushed those thoughts aside, chalking it up to the natural ebb and flow of married life. As their third wedding anniversary approached, Madison began to plan a special surprise for Silas, a romantic weekend getaway to the Oregon coast. Little did she know that this trip would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter her world and push her to the very limits of her sanity. It was at the start of the new school year, just a few weeks before their planned anniversary trip, that Lachlan Frost entered their lives. Lachlan, a new biology teacher at Pinehaven High, arrived from Australia with an easy smile and a laid-back charm that immediately endeared him to both students and faculty. Lachlan stood out in the small town like an exotic bird among sparrows. His Australian accent and penchant for colorful storytelling made him an instant hit in the teacher's lounge. Silas and Lachlan hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of literature and their experiences as relative newcomers to Pinehaven. They began having lunch together regularly, and soon Silas was inviting Lachlan over for dinner or drinks after school. At first, Madison was pleased to see her husband forming a close friendship. Silas had always been more introverted, and she hoped that Lachlan's outgoing nature might help bring him out of his shell. She enjoyed the lively conversations that filled their home when Lachlan visited, and the way Silas seemed more animated in his presence. However, as the weeks passed, Madison began to notice a shift in the dynamics. Silas and Lachlan seemed to share inside jokes that she wasn't privy to. More concerning were the frequent text messages and phone calls between the two men. Silas's phone would buzz constantly with notifications, and he would often step out of the room to take calls from Lachlan, his voice low and intimate. When Madison casually mentioned these observations to Silas, he dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Lachlan's just going through a tough time adjusting to life here," he explained. He needs a friend, that's all. Madison tried to quell the unease growing in the pit of her stomach. She told herself she was being paranoid, that she was projecting her past hurts onto her current relationship. But as Silas and Lachlan's friendship continued to deepen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As autumn leaves began to fall and a chill crept into the air, Madison's suspicions grew like shadows at dusk. The late nights at the office became more frequent, with Silas often not returning home until well after midnight. When she asked about these late hours, his explanations became increasingly vague and defensive. One evening, as Silas slept, Madison's curiosity got the better of her. With trembling hands, she picked up his phone from the nightstand. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. As she scrolled through his messages, her heart sank. The exchanges between Silas and Lachlan were filled with flirtatious banter and thinly veiled innuendos. There were references to secret meetings and passionate encounters that made Madison's cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Confronted with this evidence the next morning, Silas vehemently denied any wrongdoing. "It's just how mates talk in Australia," he insisted. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. Madison began to pay closer attention to the way Silas and Lachlan interacted when they were together. She noticed the lingering touches, the meaningful glances, the way their bodies seemed to gravitate towards each other in a room. Little did anyone know that behind Madison's increasingly stoic exterior, a plan was forming, a plan that would lead to a night of irreversible consequences. On a chilly Friday evening in late November, Madison made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Silas had told her he would be working late again, collaborating with Lachlan on their mysterious project. But something in his voice, a slight tremor of anticipation perhaps, set off alarm bells in Madison's mind. After pacing the house for hours, her suspicions gnawing at her like a hungry beast, Madison grabbed her car keys and drove to the high school. The parking lot was empty save for two vehicles, Silas's sleek black sedan and Lachlan's rugged SUV. With her heart pounding, Madison made her way to Silas's classroom. As she approached, she heard muffled voices and what sounded like laughter. Steeling herself, she peered through the small window in the door. The scene that greeted her eyes would be forever seared into her memory. Silas and Lachlan were locked in a passionate embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that left no doubt about the true nature of their relationship. Madison watched, frozen in shock, as her husband's hands roamed Lachlan's body with a familiarity that spoke of long-standing intimacy. For several agonizing minutes, Madison stood there, unable to look away from the tableau of betrayal before her. She watched as Silas and Lachlan broke apart, their faces flushed and eyes bright with desire. She heard snippets of their conversation, words of love and promises of a future together that cut her to the core. Finally, as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave, Madison stumbled back from the door. She made her way out of the school on unsteady legs, her mind reeling from what she had witnessed. The drive home passed in a blur, tears streaming down her face as she gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Back at the house, Madison moved as if in a trance. She poured herself a large glass of red wine, draining it in quick, desperate gulps before pouring another. As the alcohol coursed through her system, the initial shock began to give way to a burning rage. As the night wore on, Madison's anger and pain continued to build. She thought about confronting Silas when he returned home, but the idea of facing him, of hearing his excuses and lies, was more than she could bear. Instead, she began to formulate a plan, a way to make Silas and Lachlan pay for the pain they had caused her. Little did Madison know that her actions in the coming hours would not only destroy the lives of Silas and Lachlan, but would also set her on a path from which there would be no return. In the days following her discovery, Madison moved through her life like a ghost, going through the motions of her daily routine, while her mind churned with a toxic mix of grief, rage, and betrayal. She maintained a facade of normalcy, smiling brittle smiles at patrons in the library and exchanging pleasantries with neighbors, all while a storm brewed within her. Silas, oblivious to the fact that his secret had been uncovered, continued his charade of the devoted husband. His attempts at affection now made Madison's skin crawl, each kiss and caress feeling like a fresh betrayal. She found herself studying him when he thought she wasn't looking, searching for signs of the stranger he had become. At night, Madison lay awake, replaying the scene she had witnessed in the classroom over and over in her mind. She imagined confronting Silas, fantasized about exposing his infidelity to the entire town. But something held her back, a combination of shame, fear, and a deep-seated desire for revenge that was slowly taking root in her heart. As the weekend approached, Madison made a decision. She would confront Silas and Lachlan, force them to face the consequences of their actions. What she didn't realize was that this confrontation would spiral out of control in ways she could never have anticipated. Saturday, December 7th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Madison woke early, her head pounding from the previous night's excesses, her heart heavy with the weight of her planned confrontation. As evening approached, Madison put her plan into motion. She told Silas she was going to visit her parents for dinner, knowing full well that he would seize the opportunity to invite Lachlan over. With a kiss on the cheek that felt like acid on her skin, she left the house, driving aimlessly around town for hours as she steeled herself for what was to come. At 9:30 p.m., Madison parked her car a block away from the house and approached on foot. Through the living room window, she could see Silas and Lachlan on the couch, their bodies close, heads bent in intimate conversation. The sight sent a fresh wave of pain and anger coursing through her. Taking a deep breath, Madison entered the house quietly. She could hear Silas and Lachlan's voices drifting from the living room, punctuated by soft laughter. With trembling hands, she reached into her purse and pulled out the small handgun she had taken from her father's collection earlier that week. As she stepped into the living room, time seemed to slow down. Silas and Lachlan looked up, their expressions shifting from surprise to fear as they registered the gun in Madison's hand. Silas stood up slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Madison was beyond talking. Months of pain, betrayal, and pent-up rage exploded out of her in a torrent of accusations and obscenities. She screamed at them, demanding to know how long they had been lying to her, how they could have betrayed her so callously. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but to Madison, it felt like an eternity. As Silas took a step towards her, perhaps intending to disarm her, Madison's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot caught Silas in the chest, the impact throwing him backward onto the couch. Before she could fully register what she had done, Madison turned the gun on Lachlan, firing twice in rapid succession. The room fell silent, save for the ringing in Madison's ears and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Silas lay motionless on the couch, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Lachlan was slumped on the floor, his eyes open but unseeing. As the reality of what she had done began to sink in, Madison dropped the gun, her legs giving way beneath her. She sank to the floor, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. In a matter of moments, she had destroyed not only the lives of Silas and Lachlan, but her own as well. Outside, a neighbor who had heard the gunshots was already calling 911, setting in motion the final act of this tragic story. The wail of sirens pierced the night air as police cars and ambulances converged on the residence. Neighbors in pajamas and robes gathered on the street, watching in shock as the drama unfolded before them. Madison offered no resistance as the police entered the house, finding her still sitting on the floor of the living room, her vacant gaze fixed on the lifeless bodies of Silas and Lachlan. She was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. As word of the shooting spread through Pinehaven, the town was plunged into a state of collective shock and grief. The community that had once viewed Madison and Silas as the perfect couple now grappled with the violent reality that had shattered that illusion. The investigation into the double homicide was swift and thorough. Forensic teams combed through the home, collecting evidence that would later be presented at trial. Madison's fingerprints on the gun, gunshot residue on her hands, and the testimony of neighbors who had heard the shots left little doubt about her guilt in the physical act of the killings. However, as the case progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with Madison's friends and family painted a portrait of a woman who had been deeply wronged and pushed to her breaking point. The defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Veronica Sloan, began to build a case around temporary insanity and extreme emotional distress. Prosecution witnesses included forensic experts who detailed the ballistics evidence and the brutality of the killings. But it was the testimony of those who knew the parties involved that proved most compelling. Former colleagues of Silas and Lachlan spoke of the obvious chemistry between the two men and of Madison's increasing isolation in the months leading up to the shooting. The defense called a series of expert witnesses, including psychologists, who testified to Madison's fragile mental state and the extreme emotional trauma caused by discovering her husband's affair. Madison's own testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. In a voice barely above a whisper, she recounted the night she discovered Silas and Lachlan together and the overwhelming emotions that had driven her to violence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. In a packed courtroom, with tension so thick it could be cut with a knife, the foreman stood to deliver their decision. On the charge of first-degree murder for the death of Silas Qualley, the jury found Madison Plemons guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. For the death of Lachlan Frost, they again returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Judge had the unenviable task of determining Madison's fate. After hearing impassioned pleas from both the prosecution and defense, as well as impact statements from the families of Silas and Lachlan, the judge rendered her decision. Taking into account the circumstances of the crime and Madison's lack of prior criminal history, Judge Blackwell sentenced her to 20 years to life for each count, to be served concurrently. Madison would be eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 20 years. As Madison was led from the courtroom, the tragic saga that had gripped Pine Haven and the nation for months finally came to a close. Jennifer and Garrett's love story had begun 12 years earlier, in the fall of 2010, at a meeting in Nashville. Jennifer, then a bright-eyed real estate intern, had been tasked with selling raffle tickets. Garrett, fresh out of graduate school and working for a tech startup, found himself drawn to her infectious laugh and ambitious spirit. Their courtship was a whirlwind of coffee dates, weekend hikes, and long conversations about their dreams for the future. Jennifer admired Garrett's intellect and drive, while Garrett was captivated by Jennifer's determination and zest for life. Within a year, they were engaged, and 6 months later, they exchanged vows in a picturesque ceremony overlooking the mountains. The early years of their marriage were marked by hard work and shared goals. Jennifer threw herself into her real estate career, quickly climbing the ranks at her firm. Her natural charm and keen eye for property potential made her a favorite among clients. She had a knack for matching families with their dream homes, a talent that brought her both professional success and personal satisfaction. Garrett's career in software engineering flourished in parallel. His innovative approach to problem-solving caught the attention of industry leaders, and he soon found himself in high demand. Late nights spent coding gave way to leadership roles and speaking engagements at tech conferences. As their careers soared, so did their personal life. They bought their home in Oakwood Estates, a spacious 4-bedroom house that Jennifer had fallen in love with at first sight. Weekends were spent renovating, decorating, and turning the house into a home that reflected their shared tastes and aspirations. To the outside world, Jennifer and Garrett appeared to have it all. They hosted dinner parties where Jennifer's culinary skills shone, and Garrett's dry humor kept guests entertained. They took exotic vacations, posting enviable photos of sunsets in Bali and ski trips in the Swiss Alps. Their social media feeds were a carefully curated showcase of their seemingly perfect life. Yet, as the years passed, subtle cracks began to form in their foundation. The long hours devoted to their respective careers left little time for the passion that had once defined their relationship. Conversations about starting a family were repeatedly postponed, with both citing the need to achieve just one more professional milestone before taking that step. Still, they soldiered on, convinced that their love and shared history would be enough to weather any storm. Neither Jennifer nor Garrett could have predicted the tempest that was about to engulf their lives, threatening to destroy everything they had built together. Fiona Maroney's arrival in Oakwood brought a fresh energy to the neighborhood. At 33, she was starting over after a painful divorce, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. With her infectious laugh, Fiona stood out among the more conservative residents of the suburb. It was Jennifer who first reached out to Fiona, dropping by with a welcome basket filled with local treats and a bottle of wine. The two women hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of art and travel. Jennifer, who had always harbored a secret desire to be more creative, was fascinated by Fiona's stories of teaching art to middle schoolers and her own artistic pursuits. As winter melted into spring, Fiona became a regular fixture at the Hartley home. She and Jennifer would spend weekends exploring local galleries or trying out new recipes in Jennifer's gourmet kitchen. Garrett, initially content to let the women have their girl time, found himself increasingly drawn into their conversations, particularly when Fiona would discuss the latest exhibits at the museum where she volunteered. Fiona's presence seemed to breathe new life into the Hartley's social circle. Her quick wit and adventurous spirit added a spark to their dinner parties. She introduced the couple to new restaurants, dragged them to outdoor concerts, and even convinced the usually reserved Garrett to try salsa dancing. For Jennifer, Fiona represented a kind of freedom she had never allowed herself. She admired her friend's ability to reinvent herself after her divorce, to pursue her passions without apology. In Fiona, Jennifer saw a road not taken, a life lived with more spontaneity and less concern for others' expectations. Garrett, too, found himself looking forward to Fiona's visits. Her perspective on art and culture opened up new avenues of conversation, a welcome change from the work-related discussions that had come to dominate his interactions with Jennifer. He appreciated Fiona's ability to draw him out of his shell, to make him see the world through fresh eyes. None of them realized that this newfound friendship was setting the stage for a betrayal that would shatter their lives forever. The seeds of the affair were sown on a balmy evening in late April. Jennifer was out of town for a real estate conference, and Garrett had invited Fiona over for dinner, not wanting to eat alone. As they sat together, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset, something shifted in the air between them. Fiona, feeling bold from the wine and the intimate setting, began to open up about her failed marriage. She spoke of feeling unloved, unappreciated, and ultimately unwanted. Garrett, moved by her vulnerability, found himself sharing his own feelings of disconnection within his marriage. For long hours, the focus on career advancement, the gradual fading of passion all tumbled out in a rush of confession. In that moment of shared loneliness, their eyes met, and the spark that had been smoldering burst into flame. The first kiss was hesitant, almost chaste, but it quickly deepened into something more urgent, more primal. Guilt and desire warred within both of them, but desire won out. That night marked the beginning of their clandestine relationship. In the weeks that followed, Garrett and Fiona constructed an elaborate web of lies to conceal their affair. They stole moments together whenever they could. Lunch breaks spent in secluded corners of parks, fake work events that provided cover for rendezvous at out-of-town hotels, early morning meetings that were really hurried encounters in Fiona's art studio. The affair brought a renewed sense of excitement to both their lives. For Garrett, Fiona represented passion and spontaneity, qualities he felt had been lacking in his life with Jennifer. He reveled in Fiona's artistic nature, the way she saw beauty in the everyday world. For Fiona, Garrett offered stability and intellectual stimulation, a stark contrast to her ex-husband's volatility and disinterest in her work. Yet, even as they reveled in their newfound connection, the weight of their deception hung heavy. There were close calls, a lipstick stain hastily wiped from Garrett's collar, a text message not deleted quickly enough, unexplained absences that required increasingly complex explanations. One particularly close call came during a neighborhood barbecue. As Jennifer chatted with other guests, Garrett and Fiona found themselves alone in the kitchen. Unable to resist, they shared a passionate kiss, only to spring apart at the sound of approaching footsteps. It was Dominic coming to refill his drink. He gave them an odd look but said nothing, leaving Garrett and Fiona to wonder if he had seen anything. As spring turned to summer, the affair intensified. Garrett and Fiona began to talk about a future together. Even as guilt gnawed at them both, they knew they were playing with fire, but neither seemed able or willing to put an end to it. Little did they know that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down around them. The first inkling that something was amiss came to Jennifer on a sunny Saturday morning in early June. She had woken early, intending to surprise Garrett with breakfast in bed, only to find his side of the bed empty and cold. His running shoes were by the door, but his car was gone from the driveway. When Garrett returned an hour later, flushed and slightly out of breath, he claimed he had gone for a long run and then driven to pick up fresh bagels. Jennifer nodded, accepting his explanation, but a small seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer began to notice other small changes in Garrett's behavior. He was more attentive than usual, bringing her flowers for no reason and suggesting date nights out of the blue. Yet at the same time, he seemed distant, often lost in thought. his fingers constantly hovering over his phone as if waiting for a message. Garrett's work hours became erratic. He began coming home later, citing project deadlines and client meetings. But when Jennifer casually mentioned his late nights to a colleague of Garrett's at a social event, the colleague seemed confused, saying things had been relatively quiet at the office lately. Even Garrett's scent seemed different to Jennifer. One night, as she leaned in to kiss him hello, she caught a whiff of an unfamiliar perfume. When she commented on it, Garrett laughed it off, saying he must have picked it up from the crowded elevator at work. Jennifer tried to dismiss her growing unease, telling herself she was being paranoid. After all, this was Garrett. Her Garrett, the man she had built a life with, the man she trusted implicitly. And yet the doubts persisted, nagging at her in quiet moments. She found herself watching Garrett more closely, noting how his eyes would light up when Fiona entered a room, the way their conversations seemed to exclude everyone else. She told herself it was natural. Fiona was their friend, of course Garrett enjoyed her company. But a voice in the back of Jennifer's mind whispered that there was more to it than that. As June wore on, Jennifer's suspicions grew stronger. She began to check Garrett's phone when he was in the shower, scroll through his emails when he left his laptop open. She knew it was wrong, a violation of his privacy, but she couldn't help herself. She needed to know the truth, even as she dreaded what she might find. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Jennifer made a decision. She would follow Garrett and see for herself what he was hiding. Little did she know that her world was about to shatter into a million pieces. On a sweltering afternoon of June 14th, Jennifer's suspicions finally reached a breaking point. Garrett had announced over breakfast that he had a late meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. A quick call to his office confirmed what Jennifer had begun to suspect. There was no meeting scheduled. Heart pounding, palms sweating, Jennifer decided to follow Garrett. She called in sick to work, something she had never done before, and parked her car a block away from their house. As Garrett's car pulled out of the driveway, Jennifer followed at a discreet distance, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. To her surprise, Garrett headed not towards the city, but to a quiet, tree-lined street on the other side of town. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she realized where they were. She watched, a sick feeling growing in her stomach as Garrett parked his car and walked briskly to Fiona's front door. Fiona answered almost immediately, pulling Garrett inside with a smile that Jennifer could see even from her vantage point down the street. The door closed, and Jennifer sat in her car, numb with shock. She had suspected, yes, but seeing it with her own eyes was something else entirely. Unable to bear the thought of what might be happening inside, Jennifer got out of her car on shaky legs. She approached Fiona's house, her mind a whirl of confusion and anger. Through a gap in the living room curtains, she saw them. Garrett and Fiona locked in a passionate embrace, oblivious to the world around them. The sight hit Jennifer like a physical blow. She staggered back, a strangled sob escaping her lips. In that moment, her entire world crumbled around her. Every memory, every shared dream, every promise of forever. All of it was tainted now, corrupted by the betrayal she had just witnessed. Blinded by tears, Jennifer stumbled back to her car. She sat there for what felt like hours, alternating between gut-wrenching sobs and periods of numb disbelief. When Jennifer finally drove home, her mind was racing. She couldn't confront Garrett yet. She needed time to think, to plan. But Fiona, the thought of her former friend going about her day, smug in her betrayal, made Jennifer's blood boil. Before she could talk herself out of it, Jennifer found herself driving to Fiona's house. She parked across the street waiting. When Fiona emerged to water her front garden, Jennifer was out of her car in a flash. Fiona's eyes widened in surprise and then fear as she saw Jennifer approaching, her face a mask of fury. What followed was a confrontation that would be seared into both women's memories forever. A maelstrom of accusations, denials, and finally, painful admissions that would set in motion a chain of events leading to tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Fiona, Jennifer moved through her life like a ghost. She went through the motions at work, plastered on a smile for the neighbors, and maintained a facade of normalcy with Garrett. But inside she was seething, a cauldron of hurt and rage threatening to boil over at any moment. Jennifer had chosen not to confront Garrett immediately. She told herself it was because she needed time to think, to decide what she wanted to do. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was plotting her revenge. The idea came to her late one night as she lay awake, listening to Garrett's steady breathing beside her. If he could betray her with her best friend, why shouldn't she do the same to him? The thought of hurting Garrett the way he had hurt her brought a grim smile to Jennifer's face, and she knew exactly who she would use to execute her plan: Dominic Feldman, Garrett's best friend since college. Dominic had always been a fixture in their lives, the perpetual bachelor who flitted from one casual relationship to another. Jennifer had caught him looking at her appreciatively more than once over the years, though he had never acted on it out of respect for Garrett. As Jennifer's plan took shape, she began to pay more attention to Dominic. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her when she wore a particularly flattering outfit, how he always seemed to position himself near her at social gatherings. Yes, Dominic would be perfect for what she had in mind. Jennifer started to engineer situations where she and Dominic would be alone together. She asked for his help with small household tasks when Garrett was out, invited him over for coffee to discuss a fitness plan. Each time she turned up the charm, letting her touches linger, laughing a little too hard at his jokes. As she set her plan in motion, Jennifer felt a twisted sense of justice. Soon, she thought, Garrett would know exactly how it felt to be betrayed by the two people he trusted most. The fact that her actions might hurt Dominic as well barely registered in her mind, consumed as she was by her need for vengeance. Little did Jennifer know that her carefully laid plans were about to backfire spectacularly, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. On a sultry evening in late June, Jennifer put her plan into action. She had invited Dominic over under the pretense of needing help with a leaky faucet, knowing Garrett would be working late. She answered the door in a silk robe, her hair tousled, a glass of wine in hand. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly at her appearance, but he maintained his usual friendly demeanor. As he worked on the faucet, Jennifer hovered nearby, peppering him with questions about his day, laughing at his jokes, and finding excuses to brush against him. When the job was done, Jennifer suggested they have a drink to cool off. She led Dominic to the living room, sitting close to him on the sofa. As they talked, she gradually steered the conversation towards relationships, lamenting the lack of passion in her marriage. Jennifer leaned in, her robe slipping open slightly. "Dominic, I've always wondered what it would be like between us," she murmured, her hand resting on his thigh. Dominic froze, his eyes wide with shock. He gently removed Jennifer's hand from his leg, putting some distance between them on the couch. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. "You're my best friend's wife." Jennifer pressed on, desperation creeping into her voice. "Don't tell me you've never thought about it, Dominic. I've seen the way you look at me. We could keep it a secret. Garrett would never have to know." Dominic stood up abruptly. Humiliation washed over Jennifer as she watched Dominic gather his things. She had been so sure he would be receptive, so certain her plan would work. As he reached the door, Dominic turned back, his expression a mixture of pity and disappointment. "I won't mention this to Garrett," he said quietly, "but I think you two need to talk." The door closed behind him, leaving Jennifer alone with her shame and thwarted plans. She sank to the floor, tears of frustration and anger streaming down her face. How had everything gone so wrong? She had only wanted Garrett to feel the same pain she was feeling, to understand the depth of her hurt. As the initial shock of rejection faded, a new fear gripped Jennifer. Despite Dominic's assurance, she couldn't be certain he wouldn't tell Garrett about her attempted seduction. The thought of Garrett finding out, of him having the moral high ground despite his own betrayal, was unbearable. Little did Jennifer know that her worst fears were about to be realized, setting the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. The following evening, Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard Garrett's car pull into the driveway. Her hands shook slightly as she chopped vegetables, wondering if this would be the moment when everything came to a head. Garrett entered the house, his footsteps heavy, his greeting lacking its usual warmth. Jennifer's heart raced as she heard him approach the kitchen. When she turned to face him, the look in his eyes confirmed her worst fears. Dominic had told him everything. "Jennifer, we need to talk," Garrett said, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "What the hell were you thinking, coming onto Dominic like that?" The knife clattered from Jennifer's hand onto the cutting board. "How dare you stand there and judge me when you've been screwing my best friend behind my back for months?" Garrett's face paled, his anger giving way to shock. "Did you think I was stupid? Did you think I wouldn't notice the late nights, the secret phone calls?" The argument escalated, years of unspoken resentments and frustrations pouring out. They rehashed old arguments, dredged up past hurts, each trying to wound the other as deeply as they had been wounded. As their shouting reached a fever pitch, Jennifer suddenly remembered the gun Garrett had insisted they keep in the house for protection, hidden in a lockbox in their bedroom closet. In that moment, clouded by rage and hurt, it seemed like the only way to make the pain stop. Without thinking, Jennifer sprinted up the stairs, Garrett calling after her in confusion. She fumbled with the lockbox, her hand shaking as she extracted the cold, heavy weapon. Garrett appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening as he saw the gun in Jennifer's trembling hands. Jennifer was beyond reason. All she could see was red, the red of her anger, the red of her pain, the red of the future she had lost. As Garrett took a step towards her, his hands raised in a placating gesture, Jennifer's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house, followed by a deafening silence. Time seemed to stand still in the aftermath of the gunshot. Jennifer stood frozen, the smoking gun still clutched in her shaking hands, as Garrett crumpled to the floor. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood that was quickly spreading across the beige carpet. For a moment, Jennifer couldn't process what had happened. She stared at Garrett's prone form, waiting for him to get up, to yell at her, to do anything. But he remained motionless, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. Jennifer's anguished scream pierced the quiet of the suburban evening. She gathered Garrett's lifeless body in her arms, rocking back and forth. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood that was soaking into her clothes. In the distance, she could hear the wail of sirens growing closer. A neighbor must have heard the gunshot and called the police. Jennifer knew she should run, should try to hide what she had done, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Garrett's side. As the sirens grew louder, Jennifer's mind raced through the events that had led to this moment. The happy years of her marriage, the gradual drift apart, the affair, her misguided attempt at revenge. It all seemed so trivial now in the face of what she had done. The front door burst open downstairs, and Jennifer could hear the heavy footsteps of police officers entering the house. The Hartley residence quickly transformed into a hive of activity as law enforcement descended upon the scene. Crime scene technicians meticulously combed through the house, photographing evidence and collecting samples. The bedroom, with its blood-stained carpet and discarded weapon, became the focal point of their investigation. Detective Ava Ramirez, a seasoned homicide investigator, took charge of the case. She found Jennifer in the living room, still in her blood-soaked clothes, her eyes vacant and her responses monosyllabic. Despite her state of shock, Jennifer was read her rights and taken into custody. At the police station, Jennifer's initial shock gave way to a flood of emotion. Between sobs, she confessed to shooting Garrett, recounting the events that led to that fatal moment. Detective Ramirez listened impassively, her pen scratching across her notepad as Jennifer poured out her story of betrayal, jealousy, and misguided revenge. As Jennifer's statement was being recorded, other officers were piecing together the puzzle. They interviewed neighbors who reported hearing the couple's argument escalating throughout the evening. Fiona Maroney was brought in for questioning, her tear-stained face a mask of guilt and grief as she confirmed her affair with Garrett. Dominic Feldman provided his own statement, reluctantly sharing the details of Jennifer's failed seduction attempt and his subsequent conversation with Garrett. His testimony painted a picture of a marriage in crisis, pushed to its breaking point by infidelity and misunderstanding. Forensic evidence corroborated Jennifer's confession. Gunshot residue was found on her hands, and the bullet extracted from Garrett's body matched the gun registered in his name. The courtroom was packed each day, filled with curious onlookers eager to witness the unfolding drama of love, betrayal, and murder. Prosecutor painted a damning picture of Jennifer as a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, who had coldly plotted revenge before resorting to murder. She emphasized the premeditated nature of Jennifer's actions, from her attempted seduction of Dominic to her retrieval of the gun during the argument. The testimony of Fiona Maroney proved to be a pivotal moment in the trial. Tearfully, she recounted her affair with Garrett, admitting to the pain and damage they had caused. Her evident remorse and guilt seemed to sway some jurors, lending credence to the defense's narrative of Jennifer as a wronged wife pushed too far. Dominic Feldman's testimony was equally impactful. He described Jennifer's unsuccessful attempt to seduce him, his voice thick with discomfort as he recounted the details. However, he also spoke of the deep love he had always observed between Jennifer and Garrett, suggesting that their actions were out of character for both of them. Throughout the trial, Jennifer sat quietly at the defense table, her once vibrant presence diminished by grief and regret. When she finally took the stand, her testimony was a heart-wrenching account of a marriage unraveled by miscommunication and betrayal. She expressed deep remorse for her actions, stating that she would gladly trade places with Garrett if she could. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, Judge Harriet Goodwin delivered Jennifer's fate, taking into account the circumstances of the crime and Jennifer's lack of prior criminal history. She sentenced Jennifer to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As Jennifer was led away in handcuffs, the tragic conclusion of a once happy marriage was complete. The cautionary tale of the Hartleys would long be remembered in Oakwood, a somber reminder of how quickly love can turn to hatred and how devastating the consequences of betrayal can be. Octavia and Oscar Fairweather's love story began like a fairy tale. They met as undergraduates at Creekside College, where Octavia studied art, and Oscar pursued a degree in business administration. Octavia captivated Oscar from the moment he saw her by the campus lake. Oscar, tall and charismatic with a disarming smile, wooed Octavia with his charm and ambition. They married shortly after graduation, with dreams of building a life together in their hometown. Octavia secured a position as an art teacher at high school, where her passion for creativity and nurturing young talent quickly made her a favorite among students and faculty alike. Oscar, leveraging his family connections, landed a job at a prestigious local investment firm, climbing the corporate ladder with remarkable speed. As the years passed, the Fairweathers became pillars of the Creekside community. They were fixtures at galas and town council meetings. Their home in Oakwood Estates, purchased with Oscar's growing wealth, became a symbol of their success. Octavia's artistic touch was evident in every room, from the hand-painted murals in the living room to the carefully curated sculptures in their backyard. To the outside world, Octavia and Oscar were the epitome of a power couple. They complemented each other perfectly. Octavia's creativity balancing Oscar's business acumen, her warmth softening his sometimes brusque demeanor. Friends often remarked on how they still looked at each other with the same adoration they had in college. Yet beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, there were undercurrents of tension. Octavia and Oscar had been trying to conceive for years without success. The strain of fertility treatments and dashed hopes began to wear on their relationship. Oscar threw himself into his work, spending long hours at the office, while Octavia found solace in her art and her students. It was during this challenging time that Octavia's relationship with her mother, Cordelia Prescott, became a source of comfort and support. Cordelia, a widow who lived on the outskirts of town, had always been a free spirit. In her youth, she had traveled the world as a photojournalist, settling down in Creekside only after meeting Octavia's father. After his passing, Cordelia had retreated into a quieter life, focusing on her garden and her volunteer work at the local animal shelter. As Octavia spent more time with her mother, Oscar found himself drawn into Cordelia's orbit as well. What began as polite conversation during family dinners slowly evolved into something more, setting the stage for a betrayal that would tear the Fairweather family apart. The seeds of the affair between Oscar and Cordelia were planted on a crisp autumn evening. Octavia, consumed with preparing for an upcoming art exhibition featuring her students' work, Oscar, feeling neglected and frustrated by the growing distance in his marriage, decided to go to Cordelia's cottage alone, ostensibly to check on his mother-in-law. Cordelia, surprised but pleased by the unexpected visit, welcomed Oscar with a warm smile and a glass of her homemade wine. As they sat in her small, cluttered living room, surrounded by eclectic souvenirs from her travels, Oscar found himself opening up about his marital troubles. Cordelia listened with empathy, her eyes, so similar to Octavia's, filled with understanding. Perhaps it was the wine, or the intimate atmosphere, or simply the need for human connection. But that night a line was crossed. A comforting touch lingered too long. A gaze held more meaning than it should have. By the time Oscar left Cordelia's cottage, both knew that something had irrevocably changed. In the weeks that followed, Oscar and Cordelia manufactured reasons to see each other. Cordelia suddenly needed help with home repairs, while Oscar discovered a newfound interest in gardening. Their clandestine meetings became more frequent, always carefully timed to avoid suspicion. During one of their early encounters, Oscar arrived at Cordelia's cottage to help fix a leaky faucet. As they worked side by side in the cramped space of her bathroom, the air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. Their hands brushed accidentally, sending electric shocks through both of them. When Cordelia reached past Oscar for a towel, he caught the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and vanilla that made his head swim. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment neither could look away. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Cordelia was showing Oscar how to prune her rose bushes. As she demonstrated the technique, standing close behind him to guide his hands, both were acutely aware of their physical proximity. The gentle brush of her breath on his neck, the warmth of her body against his back, sent shivers down Oscar's spine. When he turned to ask a question, their faces were inches apart. Time seemed to stand still as they stood there, frozen in a moment of forbidden desire. During a rare moment alone at a family gathering, Oscar and Cordelia stole away to the secluded garden behind the house. Hidden from view by a trellis covered in climbing roses, they gave in to their desires. Their kisses were urgent, hands roaming with a desperation born of stolen moments. As they heard Octavia's voice calling for them, they quickly separated, straightening their clothes and hair. The guilt was immediate, but so was the thrill of their secret affair, adding a dangerous excitement to their illicit encounters. Their affair consumed them, blinding them to the consequences of their actions. In Cordelia's bedroom, a space once reserved for solitary nights, they now created a world of secret passion. The creak of bed springs and hushed whispers became a symphony of their illicit love, playing out against the backdrop of familial betrayal. As their physical intimacy deepened, so too did their emotional entanglement. What had started as a physical attraction morphed into something more complex and dangerous. They began to imagine a future together, heedless of the devastation such dreams would wreak on their family. It was this combination of physical passion and emotional connection that would ultimately lead to their undoing. They justified their actions in whispered conversations. Oscar spoke of feeling unappreciated and misunderstood by Octavia, while Cordelia confessed to a loneliness that had plagued her since her husband's death. They convinced themselves that their connection was special, something that transcended the boundaries of the conventional. As the affair deepened, so did their web of lies. Oscar began to invent business trips and late meetings. Cordelia feigned illness to avoid family gatherings. They communicated through a secret email account and disposable phones, always careful to cover their tracks. But with each deception, the weight of guilt grew heavier. Oscar found it increasingly difficult to look Octavia in the eye, while Cordelia's interactions with her daughter became strained and awkward. The very relationship that had once been Octavia's source of comfort was now tainted by betrayal. Neither Oscar nor Cordelia could have foreseen the devastating consequences their actions would have on the entire Fairweather family. As they continued their illicit liaison, they remained oblivious to the suspicions beginning to form in Octavia's mind. The first inkling that something was amiss came to Octavia on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She had decided to surprise Oscar with lunch at his office, only to be told by his confused secretary that he had left early, mentioning a meeting with a client. Octavia brushed it off as a miscommunication, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following weeks, Octavia began to notice subtle changes in Oscar's behavior. He was more distracted, often lost in thought during their conversations. His phone would buzz at odd hours, and he would step out of the room to take calls in hushed tones. When questioned, Oscar would dismiss her concerns with vague explanations about work stress and important deals in the pipeline. Octavia's artistic sensitivity, usually a source of joy in her life, now became a curse as she picked up on minute details that others might have missed. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on Oscar's clothes, a lipstick smudge on a coffee mug he brought home from the office, the way he sometimes avoided her touch. All these observations accumulated in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Her relationship with her mother also began to change. Cordelia, once eager to spend time with her daughter, now seemed distant and preoccupied. Their weekly tea sessions became less frequent, with Cordelia often canceling at the last minute, citing various commitments. When they did meet, Octavia sensed a nervousness in her mother's demeanor, a reluctance to meet her eyes that was entirely out of character. As her suspicions grew, Octavia found herself trapped in a spiral of doubt and self-recrimination. She questioned every interaction, analyzed every word spoken by Oscar and Cordelia. Was she imagining things? Had the stress of their fertility struggles and her upcoming exhibition made her paranoid? Determined to find the truth, Octavia began to investigate discreetly. She checked Oscar's credit card statements, noting several charges at restaurants and hotels that he had never mentioned. She drove by her mother's cottage at odd hours, her heart sinking when she spotted Oscar's car parked down the street on an evening when he was supposedly working late. Each new piece of evidence felt like a physical blow, chipping away at the foundation of trust that had been the bedrock of her life. Octavia's students and colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands as she demonstrated brush techniques, the forced smile that never quite reached her eyes. As the days passed, Octavia became a shadow of her former self, torn between confronting her fears and clinging to the last shreds of hope that she was mistaken. Little did she know that the truth, when it finally came to light, would be even more devastating than she could have imagined. The day Octavia's world shattered began like any other. It was a Saturday, and she had spent the morning at the school, putting the finishing touches on the student art exhibition. Oscar had left early, mumbling something about a golf game with clients. As Octavia drove home, her mind preoccupied with last-minute details for the upcoming show, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's cottage. Perhaps a cup of tea and a chat would help calm her nerves. As Octavia turned onto the quiet lane leading to Cordelia's home, her heart nearly stopped. There parked behind was Oscar's sleek black sedan. For a moment, Octavia sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel. She told herself there could be an innocent explanation, but deep down she knew. With trembling legs, Octavia approached the cottage. The curtains were drawn, but through a gap she could see movement inside. Taking a deep breath, she used her key to unlock the door, pushing it open as quietly as possible. The sight that greeted her would be forever seared into her memory. There, on the floral-patterned couch, they were locked in an intimate embrace, oblivious to the world around them. Cordelia's hair was disheveled, Oscar's shirt partially unbuttoned. On the coffee table, 2 half-empty wine glasses stood as mute witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, as if sensing her presence, Oscar and Cordelia looked up. The expressions on their faces, shock, guilt, and a flicker of defiance. What followed was a blur of emotions and accusations. Octavia's anguished cry broke the silence, startling the guilty pair. Oscar jumped to his feet, stammering excuses and pleas. Cordelia remained seated, her face ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Octavia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled questions at them. The answers, when they came, were like daggers to her heart. 6 months. It had started as friendship, then evolved. They hadn't meant for it to happen. They were sorry. Unable to bear their presence any longer, Octavia fled the cottage. She drove aimlessly for hours, her mind replaying the scene over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of the house she had once considered her sanctuary. As she sat in the darkened living room, surrounded by the trappings of her seemingly perfect life, Octavia felt something inside her break. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer magnitude of the deception. In that moment, a cold resolve began to form in her heart. Someone would have to pay for this betrayal, and Octavia knew exactly who that someone would be. The events leading up to the fatal shooting unfolded over several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Octavia, having spent the day in a haze of grief and anger, found herself pacing the halls of her home like a caged animal. The tick of the clock in the foyer seemed to mock her, counting down the moments until her world would irrevocably change. As dusk fell, Oscar returned home. He entered cautiously, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Octavia watched from the shadows of the dining room as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. Oscar called out Octavia's name, his voice strained with apprehension. When she stepped into the light, he visibly flinched. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the vibrant, loving wife he had known. Octavia's eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Oscar, his face a mask of guilt and desperation, launched into a litany of excuses and apologies. He spoke of feeling neglected, of the pressures of work and their fertility struggles. He claimed the affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. With each word, Octavia felt her anger rising, a tide of rage threatening to overwhelm her. Without fully realizing what she was doing, Octavia found herself walking to Oscar's study. She knew he kept a handgun in the desk drawer, a precaution he had insisted on after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. As if in a trance, she retrieved the weapon, feeling its cold weight in her hand. When she returned to the living room, Oscar's eyes widened in shock and fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his words now coming in a panicked rush. He promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do whatever it took to save their marriage. But Octavia barely heard him. In her mind, she saw only images of Oscar and Cordelia together, their betrayal playing on an endless loop. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Oscar lunged forward, perhaps trying to disarm her. In that moment of chaos and heightened emotion, Octavia's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the confines of the room, followed by an eerie silence, broken only by the tinkling of shattered glass from a fallen picture frame. Oscar staggered backward, a look of disbelief on his face as he pressed his hand to his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his crisp white shirt crimson. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his eyes locked on Octavia's in a silent plea. As the reality of what she had done crashed over her, Octavia dropped the gun. It clattered to the hardwood floor, the sound jolting her out of her shocked state. She rushed to Oscar's side, her anger instantly replaced by horror and regret. She pressed her hands against the wound, desperately trying to stem the flow of blood. Oscar's breathing was labored, his skin growing pale. With trembling hands, Octavia reached for her phone, dialing 911. Her voice shook as she gave the dispatcher their address, pleading for an ambulance to hurry. As she waited for help to arrive, she cradled Oscar's head in her lap, whispering a mixture of apologies and pleas for him to hold on. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshot, began to gather outside. Through the window, Octavia could see curious faces peering in, their expressions shifting from concern to shock as they took in the scene. She heard muffled voices, someone shouting about calling the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked swiftly to stabilize Oscar. Octavia watched, numb with shock, as they loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to the waiting ambulance. As the sirens faded into the distance, Octavia found herself alone in the house, surrounded by the evidence of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Mia Davis took charge of the scene, her keen eyes taking in every detail. As officers secured the area and began collecting evidence, Detective Davis approached Octavia, who sat motionless on the blood-stained couch. In a gentle but firm voice, Detective Davis informed Octavia of her rights and asked if she understood what had happened. Octavia, her voice barely audible, recounted the events of the day, the discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment the gun went off. Throughout her statement, she seemed almost detached, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. As Octavia was led away in handcuffs, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of her neighbors watching from behind hastily drawn curtains, their faces a mix of horror and fascination. At the General Hospital, Oscar Fairweather clung to life in the intensive care unit. The bullet had missed his heart by mere inches, lodging dangerously close to his spine. As he underwent multiple surgeries, a steady stream of colleagues and family friends visited, their hushed conversations in the waiting room filled with speculation and disbelief. Cordelia Prescott, racked with guilt and shame, attempted to visit her son-in-law but was turned away by the Fairweather family. She retreated to her cottage, refusing to answer calls or open her door. The weight of her role in the tragedy seemed to age her overnight, her once vibrant demeanor replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed look. Detective Davis, meanwhile, delved deeper into the case. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the events that had led to that fateful night. The more she uncovered about the Fairweather family's history and the affair between Oscar and Cordelia, the more complex the case became. As the investigation progressed, public opinion in Creekside began to shift. What had initially been seen as a clear-cut case of attempted murder in a fit of rage was revealed to be a tragedy born of betrayal and shattered trust. The town found itself divided, with some sympathizing with Octavia's plight, while others condemned her actions as inexcusable regardless of the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Octavia's best friend and fellow art teacher, Zara, came forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Octavia had confided her growing suspicions to Zara, detailing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Octavia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to confront the truth, providing valuable insight into her state of mind. Inside the packed courtroom, the air was thick with tension as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious district attorney Vincent Harding, painted a picture of Octavia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the shooting was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Octavia's defense team, headed by the seasoned attorney, presented a different narrative. They portrayed Octavia as a victim of circumstances, a woman pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal. Morales emphasized Octavia's impeccable character, her contributions to the community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under at the time of the shooting. In their closing arguments, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned pleas to the jury. T.A. Harding emphasized the seriousness of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jurors to consider the extraordinary circumstances and Octavia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury filed out to begin their deliberations, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Octavia Fairweather now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had shaken the town of Creekside to its core. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Octavia Fairweather guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution had pushed for. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Octavia standing stoically beside her attorney. The judge, taking into account Octavia's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Octavia was mandated to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient given the severity, while others believed it appropriately balanced justice with compassion. As Octavia was led away from the courtroom, the weight of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to finally settle on her shoulders. Oscar, having recovered from his physical wounds but forever changed by the experience, had moved to a different state to start anew. He and Octavia had divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and occasional phone calls. Despite the pain of their shared past, there was a tentative forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Cordelia had retreated from public life entirely. She lived as a virtual recluse in her cottage, her only contact with the outside world being the occasional visit from a home health aide. The weight of her role in the tragedy had taken a severe toll on her health and spirit. As Creekside slowly heals and life moves forward, the story of Octavia, Oscar, and Cordelia remains a powerful reminder of how quickly and irrevocably lives can change. It challenges us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust placed in us by our loved ones, and to consider the far-reaching impacts of our choices. Olivia Prescott was born on a crisp day in 1985, the only child of Eleanor and Harrison Prescott. Growing up in the affluent neighborhood of Larchmont, New York, Olivia's childhood was marked by privilege and high expectations. Her father, a prominent corporate lawyer, and her mother, a respected art curator, instilled in her a strong work ethic and a passion for the finer things in life. From an early age, Olivia showed a keen intellect and a flair for the dramatic. She excelled in her studies at the prestigious Chatsworth Academy, where she was known for her sharp wit and magnetic personality. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to command attention, whether she was delivering a speech in debate club or starring in the school's theatrical productions. Despite her apparent confidence, those closest to Olivia sensed an underlying insecurity, a constant need for validation that stemmed from the pressure to live up to her parents' lofty standards. This drive for perfection would follow her into adulthood, shaping her decisions and relationships in ways she could never have anticipated. Upon graduating university, Olivia faced the daunting task of carving out her own path. With her parents' connections and her own impressive resume, she secured a position at a renowned auction house in New York City. It was here, amidst the glittering world of high-end art and wealthy collectors, that Olivia would meet the man who would become her first husband. Woody Fuller swept into Olivia's life like a whirlwind, all charm and sophistication. 7 years her senior, Woody was already making a name for himself in the world of finance, his boyish good looks and quick wit making him a favorite among New York's elite social circles. Their eyes met across a crowded gallery, and from that moment, it seemed as though fate had brought them together. Their courtship was a whirlwind of passion and shared interests. Woody introduced Olivia to the finer points of wine tasting and the thrill of sailing, while she opened his eyes to the nuances of contemporary art and the joys of spontaneous adventure. They complemented each other perfectly, or so it appeared to the outside world. In the spring of 2010, barely a year after they first met, Woody proposed to Olivia during a romantic getaway to the Amalfi Coast. The wedding, held at the luxurious Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, was the social event of the season. The early years of their marriage were a blur of exotic vacations, glamorous parties, and professional triumphs. Olivia thrived in her role as a gallerist, opening her own space in Chelsea with Woody's encouragement and financial backing. Meanwhile, Woody's career in investment banking soared, his natural charisma and sharp instincts earning him a reputation as a rising star on Wall Street. However, as the initial glow of newlywed bliss began to fade, cracks started to appear in their seemingly perfect union. Woody's work hours grew longer, his absences more frequent. Olivia found herself increasingly alone, pouring her energy into her gallery and the charity committees that filled her social calendar. At first, she dismissed the nagging doubts as normal marital growing pains, but as months turned into years, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing from their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly between them dimmed to a flicker, replaced by a polite cordiality that felt more like a business partnership than a marriage. By their 5th anniversary, the Fullers had become masters of maintaining appearances. They still attended events together, smiling for the cameras and exchanging pleasantries with friends and colleagues. But behind closed doors, they led separate lives, each silently questioning the choices that had led them to this point of quiet desperation. The facade of marital bliss finally crumbled in the winter of 2016. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a heated argument that spelled the end, but rather a slow, painful realization that they had grown irreparably apart. She broached the subject of divorce with trepidation, half expecting Woody to fight for their relationship. Instead, she was met with a resigned acceptance that spoke volumes about the true state of their union. It seemed that Woody, too, had been contemplating an exit strategy, though neither had found the courage to voice their discontent until that moment. The legal proceedings were surprisingly amicable. Both Olivia and Woody were determined to avoid a public spectacle, agreeing to a generous settlement that left Olivia financially secure and in possession of their Tribeca loft. Friends and family were shocked by the news, having bought into the illusion of the perfect couple. For Olivia, the divorce brought a mix of relief and profound sadness. While she felt liberated from the constraints of a loveless marriage, she also mourned the death of her youthful dreams and expectations. The failure of her marriage felt like a personal defeat, a blemish on her otherwise meticulously curated life. As the ink dried on the divorce papers, Olivia found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The life she had so carefully constructed lay in ruins around her, and for the first time in her adult life she had no clear path forward. Little did she know that this period of upheaval would set the stage for a series of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In the aftermath of her divorce, Olivia embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing. She threw herself into therapy, confronting the deep-seated insecurities and fears that had plagued her throughout her life. Through this process, she began to understand the patterns that had led her into an unfulfilling marriage and vowed to break free from them. Seeking a fresh start, Olivia sold her gallery and took a sabbatical from the art world. She traveled extensively, losing herself in the vibrant markets of Marrakech, the serene temples of Kyoto, and the rugged beauty of the Scottish Highlands. Each destination peeled away another layer of the persona she had constructed, revealing the authentic Olivia that had long been buried beneath societal expectations and personal doubts. As she approached her 33rd birthday, Olivia found herself in a place of contentment she had never known before. She had cultivated a close-knit circle of friends, rediscovered her love for painting, and even adopted a rescue dog named Fitzgerald. Her life was full, and for the first time she felt no pressure to conform to anyone else's vision of success or happiness. It was in this state of newfound self-assurance that Olivia attended a gala for her nonprofit. She had no way of knowing that this event would mark the beginning of a new romance, one that would ultimately lead her down a path she could never have foreseen, toward a future fraught with passion, betrayal, and unthinkable tragedy. The annual gala was in full swing, the grand ballroom of the Museum of Art alive with the chatter of New York's philanthropic elite. Olivia, resplendent in a midnight blue gown, was in her element, moving from group to group with ease, championing her cause with passion and charm. It was during a lull in the evening, as she paused by a display of student artwork, that she first laid eyes on Paul Fisher. Paul stood out in the crowd, his tall, athletic frame lending him an air of distinguished maturity. Unlike many of the attendees who seemed more interested in being seen than in the art itself, Paul was intently studying a painting, his brow furrowed in concentration. Intrigued, Olivia approached him, curious to hear his thoughts on the piece. What followed was a conversation that flowed effortlessly from art criticism to philosophy, punctuated by moments of laughter and shared observations. Paul, she learned, was a professor of literature, with a keen interest in the intersection of visual and written storytelling. As the evening wore on, Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to Paul's quiet confidence and intellectual depth. He lacked the polished veneer of the financial world she had grown accustomed to, instead exuding a genuine warmth and curiosity that she found refreshing. When he asked for her number at the end of the night, Olivia felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Their courtship progressed rapidly, fueled by a shared passion for the arts and a deep emotional connection that took both of them by surprise. Paul was unlike anyone Olivia had ever dated, thoughtful, nurturing, and unafraid to show vulnerability. He encouraged her artistic pursuits, often reading poetry aloud as she painted in her studio. Within 6 months, they were practically inseparable. Paul proposed on a crisp autumn evening in Central Park, presenting Olivia with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Overcome with emotion and certainty, Olivia said yes without hesitation. The whirlwind romance culminated in an intimate winter wedding at the New York Public Library, surrounded by their closest friends and family. As they exchanged vows beneath the ornate ceilings of the Rosemane reading room, Olivia felt she had finally found her true partner, someone who understood and appreciated her for who she truly was. Little did she know that this moment of perfect happiness was merely the calm before a storm that would shatter her world and challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the capacity for betrayal. The first year of Olivia and Paul's marriage was a blissful honeymoon phase. They settled into a spacious brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn, blending their lives and possessions with the excitement of newlyweds. Weekends were spent exploring the city's hidden gems, attending literary events, and hosting intimate dinner parties for their eclectic group of friends. Olivia's nonprofit flourished under her renewed energy and vision, while Paul received a prestigious grant to write a book on the influence of visual arts on 20th century literature. They supported each other's endeavors wholeheartedly, creating a partnership that seemed to embody the ideal of modern marriage. As they settled into a routine, subtle changes began to emerge. Paul, once so attentive and present, started spending more time in his study, citing the pressures of his book deadline. Olivia, while understanding, couldn't shake a creeping sense of déjà vu. Memories of all surfacing unbidden. She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the positives. Unlike her first marriage, she and Paul still shared moments of genuine connection, deep conversations over morning coffee, spontaneous walks in Prospect Park, tender moments of physical intimacy. These reassurances kept her doubts at bay, at least for a time. Yet as their second anniversary approached, Olivia couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. Paul's absences became more frequent, his explanations more vague. He spoke enthusiastically about a new research partner, a fellow professor named Julian, but was oddly reticent about introducing Olivia to his colleague. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of her past, Olivia tried to address her concerns openly. Paul listened attentively, assuring her that nothing was amiss, that he was simply caught up in his work. As winter gave way to spring, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. Should she trust in the strength of their relationship, or listen to the nagging voice of suspicion growing louder in her mind? Little did she know, her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. The seeds of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly in the fertile soil of Olivia's mind. She began to notice small inconsistencies in Paul's behavior, hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room, unexplained charges on their joint credit card, the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to his clothes. At first, Olivia tried to rationalize these observations. Paul was under immense pressure with his book, she told herself. The strange charges were probably research materials. The cologne, perhaps a sample from a department store. But as the anomalies accumulated, she found it increasingly difficult to silence the voice of doubt. One rainy afternoon, while Paul was supposedly at a faculty meeting, Olivia received a call from his department secretary asking if he was feeling better. Confused, Olivia played along, her heart racing as she realized Paul had lied about his whereabouts. This incident became the catalyst for her decision to investigate further. With a mixture of guilt and determination, Olivia began to delve into Paul's life. She scrutinized his schedule, noting patterns in his absences. She pored over phone records, discovering frequent calls to an unknown number. She even went so far as to follow him one evening, watching from a distance as he met a man in a nondescript sedan, their interaction brief, but charged with an intimacy that made her stomach churn. As the evidence mounted, Olivia found herself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. The parallels to her first marriage were unmistakable, yet this time the pain cut deeper. She had opened herself completely to Paul, believing she had finally found true partnership and understanding. Torn between confronting Paul and gathering more proof, Olivia retreated into herself. She threw herself into her work, using her non-profit as a shield against the turmoil in her personal life. Friends noticed her withdrawal, the shadows under her eyes, but she deflected their concerns with practiced ease. Little did Olivia know that her world was about to be shattered in a way she could never have imagined, as the truth she sought would prove far more shocking and devastating than she ever anticipated. On a sweltering July afternoon, Olivia's suspicions reached a fever pitch. Paul had claimed to be attending a weekend literature conference in Boston, but a casual conversation with a colleague revealed no such event was taking place. Heart pounding, palms sweating, Olivia made a decision that would alter the course of her life irrevocably. She followed Paul to a discreet boutique hotel in the West Village, her mind racing with possibilities, each more painful than the last. As she watched him enter the lobby, a familiar figure caught her eye. A man with the confident stride and impeccable suit she knew all too well. It was Woody, her ex-husband, following closely behind Paul. Shock gave way to disbelief as Olivia processed the scene before her. Could it be a coincidence? A chance encounter between her current and former husband? But the furtive glances, the subtle touch of hands as they walked, told a different story. With trembling hands, Olivia followed them into the hotel, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Using a combination of charm and a hastily concocted story about a surprise for her husband, Olivia managed to convince a sympathetic desk clerk to reveal the room number. She stood outside room 507, frozen in indecision, the muffled sounds of conversation seeping through the door. Taking a deep breath, Olivia knocked. The voices inside fell silent. Moments later, Paul opened the door, his face draining of color as he registered Olivia's presence. Behind him, Woody sat on the edge of the bed, shirt unbuttoned, a look of panic etched across his features. The scene before her confirmed Olivia's worst fears, and then some. Not only was Paul having an affair, but he was having it with her ex-husband. The two men she had loved and trusted most in the world had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. Time seemed to stand still as the three of them stared at each other, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Olivia felt as though she were watching the scene unfold from outside her body, her mind struggling to process the reality of what she was witnessing. It was Woody who broke the silence, his voice hoarse as he uttered her name. "Olivia, I can explain." But there was no explanation that could soften the blow of this betrayal. With a strangled cry, Olivia turned and fled, leaving behind the shattered remains of her trust and the two men who had destroyed it. The days following Olivia's discovery were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. She shut herself away in their brownstone, ignoring the incessant calls and messages from both Paul and Woody. It wasn't until a week later that she finally agreed to meet with Paul, her emotions having coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. They met at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from their usual haunts. Paul arrived looking haggard, his usual polished appearance marred by days of obvious distress. Olivia, by contrast, was the picture of composure, her face a mask of controlled calm. Paul launched into an explanation, his words tumbling out in a desperate flood. He spoke of a chance encounter with Woody at a literary event, of a connection he couldn't explain or resist. He swore it had started innocently, just two men bonding over their shared history with Olivia, but had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Olivia listened in stony silence, her mind reeling with the implications of his confession. How long had this been going on? How could they have done this to her? Paul pleaded for understanding, for forgiveness, insisting that his love for Olivia was real despite his transgression. But Olivia was beyond understanding. The double betrayal had shattered something fundamental within her. She demanded to know if Woody had known about their marriage from the beginning, if this had all been some cruel joke at her expense. Paul's hesitation before answering told Olivia everything she needed to know. The realization that both men had entered into this affair with full knowledge of its impact on her was the final straw. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing curious glances from other patrons. "I want a divorce," she stated flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I never want to see or hear from either of you again." With those words, Olivia walked out of the cafe and out of Paul's life, leaving him calling after her, his pleas falling on deaf ears. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's world spiraled into chaos. She threw herself into her work with a frantic energy, using it as a shield against the pain and betrayal that threatened to consume her. Her friends worried, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the brittleness of her smile. But Olivia rebuffed all attempts at comfort or intervention. Paul continued his campaign for reconciliation, alternating between heartfelt apologies and impassioned declarations of love. Woody, too, reached out, seeking to explain his role in the affair. Their persistent efforts only served to fuel Olivia's growing anger and resentment. One rainy evening, as Olivia sat alone in her darkened living room, a bottle of wine her only companion, something inside her snapped. The carefully constructed facade of control crumbled, leaving raw, unbridled emotion in its wake. In a frenzy, she began to destroy the remnants of her life with Paul, shredding photographs, smashing mementos, her anguished cries echoing through the empty house. It was in this state that she discovered the gun, a small .38 revolver Paul kept locked in his desk for protection. As she held the weapon, feeling its weight and cold metal against her skin, a dangerous calm settled over her. For the first time since the revelation, Olivia felt a sense of power, of control over her situation. The next morning, operating on autopilot, Olivia dressed with meticulous care. She applied her makeup with precision, donned her favorite silk blouse, and slipped the gun into her handbag. She had made a decision, though its full implications had yet to register in her conscious mind. Olivia drove to the familiar address of Woody's penthouse apartment, where she knew both men would be. She had overheard Paul arranging the meeting in one of his many voicemails, a final attempt to sort things out between the three of them. The irony of returning to the home she had once shared with Woody was not lost on her. As she rode the elevator to the top floor, Olivia's mind was eerily quiet. Gone were the swirling thoughts of betrayal and pain, replaced by a singular focus on the task at hand. She didn't know exactly what she planned to do, but she knew with certainty that after today, everything would change. The elevator doors opened, and Olivia stepped out, her hand closing around the cold metal in her purse as she approached the apartment door. The luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of Olivia's past life with Woody, now became the stage for a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Olivia entered without knocking, finding Paul and Woody deep in conversation in the living room. Their faces registered shock, then fear, as they took in Olivia's wild-eyed appearance and the gun now gripped tightly in her trembling hand. What happened next was a blur of shouting, pleading, and chaos. Woody attempted to reason with Olivia, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Paul moved towards her, perhaps hoping to disarm her. The first shot rang out, catching Woody in the chest and sending him stumbling backwards over an antique coffee table. Paul froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Olivia, don't do this." But Olivia was beyond words, beyond reason. The second and third shots hit Paul in rapid succession, his body crumpling to the floor beside the man he had chosen over her. As the echo of gunshots faded, an eerie silence descended upon the room. Olivia stood motionless, the gun still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. The magnitude of what she had done slowly began to penetrate the fog of rage and betrayal that had driven her to this point. She looked down at the bodies of the two men she had once loved, their lifeblood staining the plush white carpet. The gun slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. In the distance, she could hear the wail of approaching sirens. A neighbor, no doubt, having called the police upon hearing the gunshots. Olivia made no attempt to flee. She sank to her knees, her mind struggling to process the horrific scene before her, as she waited for the authorities to arrive and bring an end to this nightmarish chapter of her life. The police arrived within minutes, bursting into the apartment with weapons drawn. They found Olivia kneeling on the floor, her once immaculate blouse now spattered with blood, her eyes vacant and unfocused. She offered no resistance as they handcuffed her and led her away, responding to their questions with an eerie calmness that unnerved even the most seasoned officers. The crime scene investigators swarmed the apartment, meticulously documenting every detail of the gruesome tableau. Forensic experts collected blood samples, retrieved bullet casings, and photographed the victims' positions. The murder weapon, still lying where Olivia had dropped it, was carefully bagged and tagged as evidence. At the police station, Olivia was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Detective Elaine Samuels, a veteran of the NYPD's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She observed Olivia through the one-way mirror, noting the suspect's composed demeanor, a stark contrast to the violent act she had just committed. During the initial questioning, Olivia was surprisingly forthcoming. She recounted the events leading up to the shooting with a detachment that bordered on clinical, as if she were describing a movie she had watched rather than actions she had taken. "Yes, I shot them. They betrayed me. They deserved it." Detective Samuels probed deeper, trying to understand the motivations behind the crime. As Olivia spoke about discovering the affair between her current and ex-husband, flashes of emotion began to break through her calm exterior. Anger, pain, and a profound sense of betrayal colored her words, providing glimpses into the psychological turmoil that had driven her to murder. As the interrogation progressed, Samuels built a timeline of events, corroborating Olivia's story with evidence collected from the crime scene and witness statements from neighbors and friends. The picture that emerged was one of a woman pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal, her actions born of temporary insanity rather than premeditated malice. By the end of that long night, Olivia Prescott Fisher was formally charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. As she was led to a holding cell, the full weight of her actions finally seemed to hit her, and she began to weep uncontrollably. The arrest of Olivia, once a respected figure in New York's art and philanthropy circles, sent shockwaves through the city. Olivia's defense team, led by renowned criminal attorney, quickly began building their case. They argued for a plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, citing the extreme emotional distress caused by the discovery of the affair. Psychiatric evaluations were ordered, and experts were brought in to testify about the psychological impact of such a profound betrayal. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They argued that Olivia's actions were premeditated, pointing to her deliberate acquisition of the gun and her journey to confront the victims. They characterized her as a woman scorned, driven by jealousy and a desire for revenge rather than temporary madness. As the trial approached, public opinion was divided. Some saw Olivia as a sympathetic figure, a victim pushed too far by the cruel actions of those she trusted most. Others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who had taken the law into her own hands. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives. Character witnesses were called, painting contrasting pictures of Olivia's personality and state of mind. Former colleagues praised her dedication and compassion, while acquaintances of Paul and Woody spoke of a woman prone to jealousy and possessiveness. Throughout the proceedings, Olivia sat quietly at the defense table, her face a mask of composed sorrow. She seemed a far cry from the successful, vivacious woman she had once been. The weight of her actions etched in the lines of her face and the dullness of her once bright eyes. Olivia was found guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than the original murder accusations. The judge, taking into account Olivia's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the crime, sentenced her to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As the verdict was read, Olivia stood stoically, her composure finally cracking as the reality of her future set in. She was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, leaving behind a gallery of stunned spectators and a society grappling with the tragic consequences of betrayal and uncontrolled emotion. In the end, the story of Olivia served as a somber reflection on the complexities of human relationships, the devastating power of betrayal, and the thin line that separates civilized behavior from primal instinct. Jennifer Ashcroft, a strikingly beautiful 52-year-old woman, had built her fortune in the cutthroat world of biotech. Her company was at the forefront of brain interface technology, and Jennifer was known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding determination. She moved through life with the confidence of someone who always got what she wanted, whether in the boardroom or the bedroom. A 20-year-old Ryan Breslin, with his brooding good looks, seemed an unlikely match for the poised and polished Jennifer. A college dropout with a troubled past, Ryan had drifted through a series of dead-end jobs before a chance encounter with Jennifer changed the trajectory of his life. Their relationship, while unconventional, appeared to offer both parties what they desired. For Jennifer, a vibrant young companion to stave off loneliness, and for Ryan, financial security, and a taste of luxury he had never known. For nearly a year, their arrangement flourished in the shadows of Riverton. But as summer gave way to autumn, a shift in their delicate dynamic would set in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed, leaving the community to grapple with the dark undercurrents that had been flowing beneath its pristine surface all along. Jennifer Ashcroft's path to wealth and power began in the middle-class suburbs of Boston. Born to a high school chemistry teacher and a librarian, young Jennifer showed an early aptitude for science and an insatiable curiosity about the human mind. Her parents, recognizing her potential, scrimped and saved to provide her with every educational opportunity they could afford. At 16, Jennifer's life took a dramatic turn when her science fair project on neurotransmitters caught the eye of a visiting professor from MIT. Impressed by her precocious talent, he became her mentor, guiding her through accelerated studies and into the prestigious neuroscience program at MIT. It was here that Jennifer's ambition truly took flight. During her graduate studies, Jennifer's research into neuroplasticity attracted the attention of several biotech startups. By 25, she had secured her first patent, a fledgling company working on brain-computer interfaces. Under Jennifer's leadership, the company flourished, its stock price soaring as breakthroughs in the technology made headlines. With each success, Jennifer's wealth and influence grew, but so did her reputation for ruthlessness. Former colleagues spoke in hushed tones of her ability to charm and manipulate, to identify weaknesses and exploit them mercilessly. Jennifer's personal life was marked by a series of short-lived marriages, each ending as her partners found themselves unable to compete with her true passion, her work. Her first husband, a fellow researcher she met at MIT, lasted 3 years before filing for divorce, citing emotional neglect. The second, a charming venture capitalist, made it to year 5 before Jennifer's suspicions of his infidelity led to an acrimonious split. After her third divorce at 48, from a younger art dealer who claimed she had become obsessively controlling, Jennifer swore off traditional relationships. Instead, she began to seek out the company of much younger men, drawn to their vitality and the uncomplicated nature of purely transactional arrangements. It was a lifestyle that suited her, allowing her to maintain control while satisfying her needs for companionship and physical intimacy. Yet as Jennifer approached her 50s, a creeping sense of loneliness began to gnaw at her. It was this vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath her polished exterior, that would leave her susceptible to the intoxicating allure of Ryan Breslin and the destructive jealousy that would follow. Ryan Breslin's early life stood in stark contrast to Jennifer's. Born in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, Ryan was the youngest of 4 children in a family perpetually teetering on the edge of poverty. His father, a long-haul trucker with a penchant for alcohol, was rarely home. His mother, overwhelmed and battling depression, struggled to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Ryan learned to fend for himself. Fleccid with good looks and natural charm, he discovered early on that these attributes could be leveraged to his advantage. By high school, Ryan had perfected the art of getting by with minimal effort, relying on his charisma to smooth over his academic shortcomings and disciplinary issues. Despite his lackluster academic performance, Ryan's SAT scores were surprisingly high, hinting at an intelligence he rarely applied to his studies. This, combined with his prowess on the basketball court, earned him a scholarship to a small liberal arts college in Philadelphia. However, the freedom of college life proved too tempting for Ryan. Away from the watchful eyes of his family and high school teachers, he fell in with a party crowd. His grades plummeted, and by the end of his freshman year, Ryan had lost his scholarship. Too ashamed to return home, he decided to stay in Philadelphia, bouncing between low-wage jobs and crashing on friends' couches. It was during this aimless period that Ryan's path intersected with Jennifer's. Working as a barista in an upscale cafe frequented by business executives, Ryan caught Jennifer's eye one rainy Tuesday morning. She was struck by his easy smile and the hint of vulnerability behind his confident demeanor. For Ryan, Jennifer represented everything he thought he wanted: sophistication, success, and the promise of a life far removed from his humble beginnings. Their initial flirtation quickly evolved into something more. Jennifer, intrigued by Ryan's raw potential and eager to shape him into her ideal companion, offered him a proposition. She would provide him with financial support, introduce him to her world of luxury and refinement, in exchange for his exclusive companionship. For Ryan, faced with mounting debts and dwindling prospects, the offer seemed too good to refuse. Seizing the opportunity, Jennifer invited him as her guest, her tone making it clear that this was more than a casual invitation. The gallery opening marked the beginning of Ryan's induction into Jennifer's world. She arrived at his shabby apartment, presenting him with a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. As they moved through the event, Jennifer expertly guided Ryan, whispering explanations about the art and introducing him to her circles as her young protege. For Ryan, the evening was intoxicating. He found himself easily slipping into the role of the charming, artistic young man, feeding off the approving glances and engaging conversations with Jennifer's peers. As the night wore on, the attraction between them grew palpable, culminating in a passionate encounter back at Jennifer's penthouse. In the afterglow, Jennifer laid out her proposition. She would provide Ryan with a generous monthly allowance, pay for his education if he chose to return to college, and introduce him to opportunities he could only dream of. In return, she expected his companionship, discretion, and exclusivity. Ryan, seeing a chance to reinvent himself and escape his directionless existence, agreed without hesitation. The following months were a whirlwind for Ryan. Jennifer moved him into the guest house on her estate, replacing his wardrobe with designer labels and introducing him to the finer things in life. She enrolled him in art appreciation classes, hired a personal trainer to hone his already impressive physique, and taught him the nuances of wine tasting and fine dining. Jennifer took immense pleasure in molding Ryan, viewing him as both a project and a prized possession. She reveled in the envious glances they received when they attended events together, proudly showing off her attractive young companion. For Ryan, the relationship offered security and excitement in equal measure. He threw himself into his new role with enthusiasm, eager to prove his worth and maintain the lifestyle to which he was quickly becoming accustomed. Their physical relationship was passionate and adventurous, with Jennifer introducing Ryan to experiences he had never imagined. She pushed his boundaries, always maintaining control, a dynamic that spilled over into other aspects of their relationship. As summer turned to fall, Jennifer and Ryan settled into a rhythm of lavish vacations, social events, and intimate evenings at home. To the outside world, they appeared to be an unconventional but happy couple. However, beneath the surface, the seeds of codependency and obsession were taking root, setting the stage for the turmoil that was to come. The delicate balance of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship began to shift with the arrival of Aria Thornton, a 20-year-old art history major at the local university. Aria entered their lives innocuously enough, as a part-time docent at the Museum of Modern Art. Ryan first encountered Aria during one of his frequent visits to the museum, a habit encouraged by Jennifer to further his art education. Aria was leading a tour group, her passion for the artwork evident in her animated descriptions and insightful commentary. Ryan found himself drawn to her enthusiasm, so different from Jennifer's calculated appreciation of art as a status symbol. After the tour, Ryan approached Aria, engaging her in a discussion about the exhibition. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared laughter and a palpable sense of connection. For the first time in months, Ryan felt truly seen for who he was, rather than as an extension of Jennifer. Arya, with her vibrant style and infectious laugh, represented everything that Jennifer was not. Where Jennifer was polished and restrained, Arya was spontaneous and expressive. Her youth and energy resonated with Ryan, reminding him of the pure relationships he had sacrificed for his arrangement with Jennifer. Over the next few weeks, Ryan found himself visiting the museum more frequently, always managing to time his visits with Arya's shifts. Their friendship blossomed quickly, bonding over shared interests in art, music, and philosophy. Arya introduced Ryan to her world of college parties, indie film screenings, and late-night discussions in 24-hour diners. For Ryan, these interactions with Arya and her friends were a breath of fresh air. He rediscovered parts of himself that had been suppressed in his relationship with Jennifer, including his own artistic aspirations. Arya encouraged him to pursue his interest in photography, even gifting him a vintage camera she had found at a flea market. As Ryan spent more time with Arya, he began to question the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. The stark contrast between the genuine connection he felt with Arya and the transactional nature of his arrangement with Jennifer became increasingly apparent. He found himself manufacturing excuses to spend time away from the estate, his thoughts constantly drifting to Arya. Unbeknownst to Ryan, his changing behavior and growing distraction had not gone unnoticed by Jennifer. Her keen instincts, honed by years of corporate maneuvering, sensed a shift in their dynamic. As Ryan pulled away, Jennifer's determination to maintain control over him only intensified, setting the stage for the conflict that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Jennifer noticed Ryan checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain messages. He began to spend more time at the museum, citing a newfound passion for contemporary art. While Jennifer initially encouraged this interest, a nagging suspicion began to take root in her mind. One evening, as they prepared for a charity gala, Jennifer casually asked about Ryan's day at the museum. His response was enthusiastic, filled with details about a new exhibition. But it was the mention of Arya, the incredibly knowledgeable docent, that caught Jennifer's attention. The way Ryan's eyes sparkled as he spoke of her set off alarm bells in Jennifer's head. Determined to uncover the truth, Jennifer began to monitor Ryan more closely. She installed a GPS tracker on his phone under the guise of a security upgrade. She hired a private investigator to follow him during his outings. The reports she received confirmed her worst fears. Ryan was spending considerable time with a young woman, their body language indicating a clear attraction. As evidence of Ryan's growing connection with Arya mounted, Jennifer's jealousy festered. She oscillated between icy detachment and clingy desperation, her moods becoming increasingly unpredictable. One moment she would shower Ryan with expensive gifts. The next, she would subject him to passive-aggressive comments and veiled threats. Jennifer's behavior began to affect her professional life as well. She became distracted during important meetings, snapping at employees for minor infractions. Her assistant noticed an increase in her alcohol consumption, often finding empty wine bottles in her office trash. Unable to contain her suspicions any longer, Jennifer confronted Ryan after a particularly late night out. She demanded to know where he had been, accusing him of betraying her trust. Ryan, caught off guard, attempted to downplay his friendship with Arya, insisting that Jennifer was overreacting. The argument escalated quickly, with Jennifer reminding Ryan of everything she had done for him and insinuating that he owed her his loyalty. This confrontation marked a turning point in their relationship. Ryan, feeling trapped and resentful of Jennifer's possessiveness, began to withdraw further. He became more guarded with his phone, careful not to mention Arya, and invented elaborate excuses for his absences. Jennifer, driven by her growing paranoia, intensified her efforts to control Ryan. She insisted on accompanying him to art events, her possessive body language sending a clear message to anyone who approached them. She surprised him with impromptu visits to the museum, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the young docent who had captured Ryan's attention. As the weeks wore on, the emotional chasm between Jennifer and Ryan widened. Their once passionate encounters became mechanical, tinged with an undercurrent of resentment. Jennifer's jealousy morphed into an obsession, consuming her thoughts and driving her to increasingly desperate measures to keep Ryan by her side. Little did she know that her possessive love was pushing Ryan further away. steering them both towards a confrontation that would have fatal consequences. As Jennifer's jealousy intensified, she embarked on a calculated campaign to maintain control over Ryan. Drawing on the same strategic thinking that had made her a formidable businesswoman, she deployed a range of manipulation tactics designed to keep Ryan dependent on her and isolated from Arya's influence. Jennifer's first move was to exploit Ryan's financial dependence. She began to withhold his allowance, citing fictitious issues with her accounts or claiming she needed to reallocate funds for business purposes. When Ryan expressed concern, she would relent, but not before extracting promises of increased commitment and time spent together. Emotional manipulation became Jennifer's primary weapon. She oscillated between lavishing Ryan with affection and subjecting him to prolonged periods of icy silence. This hot and cold treatment left Ryan constantly off balance, never sure where he stood. Jennifer also employed more subtle tactics to isolate Ryan from potential support systems. She scheduled trips that conveniently coincided with plans Ryan had made with friends. She expressed concern about his old acquaintances, implying they were a bad influence or simply using him for his newfound status. Gradually, Ryan's social circle shrank, leaving Jennifer as his primary source of companionship and validation. In moments of perceived threat, Jennifer would remind Ryan of all she had done for him, framing her controlling behavior as acts of love and generosity. She'd recount how she had rescued him from a life of poverty and obscurity, implying that without her, he would be nothing. These guilt trips served to reinforce Ryan's sense of obligation and indebtedness to Jennifer. As Ryan continued to pull out, Jennifer's tactics grew more desperate. She began to fake health scares, claiming stress-induced migraines or fainting spells that mysteriously coincided with times Ryan wanted to go out alone. Her performance was so convincing that Ryan often canceled his plans out of genuine concern for her well-being. Through this web of manipulation, Jennifer sought to create a reality where Ryan believed he needed her, where his autonomy was slowly eroded until staying with her seemed like the only viable option. Yet, with each manipulative act, she was pushing Ryan closer to his breaking point, fueling a resentment that would soon boil over with devastating consequences. During one of her clandestine investigations into Ryan's past, Jennifer uncovered a secret that she believed would give her the ultimate leverage. Through her network of private investigators, she learned that Ryan had been involved in a car accident during his freshman year of college. The accident had resulted in a serious injury to another student, but Ryan had fled the scene in a panic. The case had gone cold due to lack of evidence, but Jennifer now held the missing pieces. Armed with this explosive information, Jennifer carefully planned her approach. She waited for a moment when Ryan was particularly vulnerable, after a heated argument about his increasing absences. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer calmly mentioned the accident. The color drained from Ryan's face as he slowly turned back to her. Jennifer laid out the facts with cold precision, producing police reports. She made it clear that she possessed enough evidence to reopen the case and implicate Ryan. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. If Ryan didn't comply with her wishes, she would turn the information over to the authorities. The revelation shattered Ryan. The accident had been the catalyst for his downward spiral in college, the guilt eating away at him for years. He had convinced himself that by leaving his old life behind, he could escape his past. Now that illusion was cruelly stripped away. Jennifer pressed her advantage, presenting Ryan with a choice. He could recommit to their relationship, cut all ties with Arya, and follow Jennifer's rules to the letter, or she would expose his secret, ruining his life and possibly sending him to prison. Trapped and desperate, Ryan initially agreed to Jennifer's demands. He stopped visiting the museum, ignored Arya's increasingly worried messages, and became a virtual prisoner in Jennifer's gilded cage. Jennifer reveled in her victory, believing she had finally secured Ryan's unwavering loyalty. However, the weight of the blackmail soon began to take its toll on both of them. Ryan became withdrawn and depressed, his once vibrant personality dulled by the constant stress of living under threat. He went through the motions of their relationship, but the spark that had initially drawn Jennifer to him was extinguished. Jennifer, for her part, found that her victory left her feeling hollow. The passionate, challenging young man she had fallen for was replaced by a submissive shell. She vacillated between guilt over her actions and frustration at Ryan's listlessness. As weeks passed, the tension in the household became unbearable. Ryan's resentment simmered just below the surface, While Jennifer's paranoia grew, she became convinced that Ryan was plotting against her, looking for a way to neutralize her leverage. The situation was untenable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark would come in the form of a chance encounter that would push Ryan to his limits and set in motion the final fatal confrontation between him and Jennifer. The catalyst for the final confrontation came on a crisp autumn evening. Jennifer had dragged Ryan to a gallery opening, parading him before her peers like a prized possession. As they moved through the crowd, Ryan's eyes locked with a familiar face across the room. It was Arya, looking striking in a vintage dress, her presence a stark reminder of the freedom and genuine connection he had lost. Before Jennifer could react, Ryan mumbled an excuse and fled the gallery. He found himself wandering the streets, his mind racing. The chance encounter with Arya had awakened something in him, a fierce desire for freedom, a reminder of the person he once was and could be again. When Ryan finally returned to the estate in the early hours of the morning, he found Jennifer waiting for him, her face a mask of cold fury. The argument that ensued was unlike any they had before. Ryan, emboldened by his realization and no longer willing to be controlled, confronted Jennifer about her manipulation and blackmail. Jennifer, sensing she was losing her grip on Ryan, resorted to her final play. She reminded him of the evidence she held, threatening not only to expose his past, but to use her influence to destroy any future he might hope to have. She painted a vivid picture of the ruin that awaited him if he dared to leave her. But instead of cowing Ryan, her threats only served to strengthen his resolve. In a moment of clarity, he realized that no future with Jennifer, no matter how luxurious, was worth the price of his soul. With a calmness that belied the turmoil within him, Ryan told Jennifer that he was leaving, regardless of the consequences. Jennifer, faced with the reality of losing Ryan despite her best efforts, snapped. What happened next would shock the community and change both their lives forever. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer's composure shattered completely. With a primal scream of rage and desperation, she lunged at him, her manicured nails raking across his face. Ryan, caught off guard by the sudden violence, stumbled backward, knocking over an antique vase that shattered on the marble floor. The sound of breaking porcelain seemed to push Jennifer further into a frenzy. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart and swung it at Ryan's head. He ducked, the decanter missing him by inches and smashing against the wall, showering them both with glass and expensive scotch. Ryan, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to restrain Jennifer, pleading with her to calm down. But Jennifer was beyond reason. She clawed at him, kicking and screaming incoherently about betrayal and ingratitude. In the struggle, they careened into Jennifer's prized art collection, paintings crashing to the floor around them. As they grappled, Jennifer's hand closed around a letter opener on her desk, a wicked ornate thing that was more weapon than office tool. She plunged it toward Ryan's chest. He managed to deflect the blow, but the blade sliced deeply into his arm, drawing a spray of blood. The sight of blood seemed to momentarily snap Jennifer back to reality. She staggered back, the letter opener falling from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Ryan, clutching his bleeding arm, saw an opportunity to escape and made a dash for the door. But Jennifer, in a final desperate act, grabbed his injured arm, yanking him back with surprising strength. Ryan, acting on pure instinct and adrenaline, shoved her away hard. Jennifer stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her head striking the corner of the heavy marble fireplace with a sickening crack. Jennifer crumpled to the floor, a pool of blood quickly spreading beneath her hair. Ryan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The room, so recently a scene of chaos, was suddenly terribly still. With trembling hands, Ryan checked for a pulse, finding none. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Jennifer was dead, and his life as he knew it was over. In a daze, he stumbled out of the house into the cool night air, leaving behind a scene of destruction that would soon become the center of a sensational investigation. The grisly discovery was made by Jennifer's housekeeper, Elodia Ramirez, early the next morning. Her screams upon finding her employer's lifeless body shattered the tranquil morning silence of Riverton, bringing neighbors running and prompting a flurry of calls to 911. Detective Lydia Blackwell, a veteran of the Riverton Police Department's Homicide Division, arrived at the scene within the hour. The opulent living room, now a tableau of violence, told a story of a fierce struggle. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she made her initial survey, noting the overturned furniture, shattered artifacts, and the smears of blood that led to Jennifer's body by the fireplace. As crime scene technicians swarmed the house, Detective Blackwell began piecing together the events of a previous night. Security camera footage showed Ryan fleeing the premises in the early hours of the morning, his shirt stained with blood. His swift disappearance made him the prime suspect, and an all-points bulletin was issued for his arrest. As the investigation progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with staff and acquaintances revealed the tumultuous nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship. Several witnesses reported hearing frequent arguments and expressed concern about Jennifer's increasingly erratic behavior. A breakthrough came when detectives discovered Jennifer's hidden files detailing her investigation into Ryan's past. The evidence of blackmail added a new dimension to the case, suggesting that Ryan might have been acting in desperation rather than cold-blooded murder. Meanwhile, Ryan remained at large. Sightings were reported across the state, but he managed to elude capture. The turning point in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Aria Thornton, racked with guilt over her role in the events, came forward with crucial information. She provided investigators with text messages and voicemails from Ryan, documenting Jennifer's escalating behavior and his growing fear. Aria's testimony painted a picture of Ryan as a victim of manipulation and abuse, trapped in a gilded cage by Jennifer's wealth and threats. This new perspective prompted Detective Blackwell to dig deeper into Jennifer's past, uncovering a pattern of obsessive behavior and allegations of stalking from her previous relationships. Forensic evidence from the crime scene began to corroborate Ryan's version of events. The angle of Jennifer's fatal injury was consistent with an accidental fall, and defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had been the aggressor in the final confrontation. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Jennifer's own digital footprint. A thorough examination of her computers revealed the full extent of her surveillance of Ryan, including GPS tracking data and recordings from hidden cameras in their home. The level of invasion and control shocked even the most seasoned investigators. As the true nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship came to light, public opinion began to shift. The narrative of the gold-digging boy toy gave way to a more nuanced understanding of a young man trapped in an abusive situation. Initially charged with second-degree murder, Ryan's case took an unexpected turn. As evidence of Jennifer's manipulation and abuse mounted, the district attorney's office faced increasing pressure to reconsider the charges. After lengthy deliberations and negotiations with Ryan's defense team, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. After weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Ryan was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, a verdict that acknowledged his role in Jennifer's death, while also recognizing the extenuating circumstances that led to the fatal confrontation. The judge, taking into account Ryan's lack of prior criminal record and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others arguing that Ryan had already suffered enough. Remington Harlow, a successful software engineer, and his wife Cordelia, a talented interior designer, were the picture of marital bliss to their friends and neighbors. Their home, with its manicured lawn and white picket fence, stood as a testament to their seemingly perfect life. But beneath the surface, a dark current was stirring. Remington's growing fascination with a taboo fantasy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their idyllic existence and end in tragedy. What began as a consensual exploration of desires would spiral into a maelstrom of jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Remington Harlow was born in 1985 to a middle-class family in Eugene. From an early age, he displayed a keen intellect and a fascination with computers. His parents, both educators, nurtured his interests, and by the time he entered high school, Remington was already coding his own programs. Despite his academic prowess, he struggled socially, often feeling awkward and out of place among his peers. Cordelia Astor, born in 1987, grew up in a wealthy family in Seattle, Washington. The youngest of 3 children, she was vivacious and creative from the start. Her parents, successful real estate developers, provided her with every opportunity, including art classes and interior design courses. Their paths crossed in 2005 at Reed College in Portland. Remington, a junior computer science major, literally bumped into Cordelia, a freshman art student in the campus library. He was immediately smitten by her radiant smile and effortless charm. Cordelia, in turn, found herself drawn to Remington's quiet intensity and brilliant mind. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, late-night coding sessions, where Cordelia would sketch while Remington typed, and explorations of Portland's eclectic art scene. Despite their different backgrounds and personalities, they found in each other a perfect complement. They married in 2009, shortly after Cordelia's graduation. The wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard in the Willamette Valley, was a joyous affair that seemed to portend a bright future. Remington had already secured a high-paying job at a tech startup in Portland, while Cordelia began to make a name for herself in the city's competitive interior design market. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought their dream home in Oak Ridge, traveled the world, and built a wide circle of friends. Remington's career soared as he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior engineer at a tech firm. Cordelia's design business flourished, with her work featured in several magazines. From the outside, the Harlows appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a strong, loving marriage. But as they entered their 30s, subtle cracks began to form in their seemingly flawless facade, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Harlows approached their 10th wedding anniversary, a restlessness began to creep into their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable, but sometimes monotonous glow. Remington, always introspective, found himself increasingly drawn to online forums and discussions about alternative sexual lifestyles. It started innocently enough, a curiosity about what other couples did to spice up their love lives. But as Remington delved deeper into these virtual communities, he became particularly fascinated by the concept of cuckolding. The idea of watching his wife with another man, of being a voyeur to her pleasure, awakened something within him. At first, Remington kept these thoughts to himself, ashamed and confused by the intensity of his desires. He would stay up late, ostensibly working, but in reality, he was consuming every piece of cuckold-related content he could find. Cordelia, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in her husband. She noticed his distraction, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over during their conversations, the increased frequency of his late nights at the computer. Concerned, she gently probed, asking if everything was all right, if work was becoming too stressful. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, Remington decided to broach the subject with Cordelia. One evening over a bottle of wine, he haltingly confessed his newfound interest. He spoke of his desires, his curiosity about exploring this fantasy, all the while watching Cordelia's face for signs of disgust or rejection. To his surprise and relief, Cordelia didn't recoil. Instead, she listened with an open mind, asking thoughtful questions about what exactly appealed to him about this scenario. While she expressed initial reservations, she also admitted to a certain intrigue. The idea of being desired by another man, of being the center of attention, held its own allure. This conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. What had been a private fantasy for Remington was now out in the open, a possibility to be explored together. Neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this revelation would have on their lives, or the dangerous path it would ultimately lead them down. The Harlows' foray into the world of cuckolding began cautiously. They set ground rules, discussed boundaries, and agreed to take things slowly. But finding the right person to introduce into their marriage proved challenging. They wanted someone attractive and charismatic, but also discreet and respectful of their arrangement. Enter Thaddeus Blackwood. Cordelia met him at a charity art auction in downtown Portland. Tall, with piercing green eyes, Thaddeus exuded a magnetic charm that drew people to him. As the owner of a successful art gallery, he moved effortlessly through Portland's cultural elite, his wit and knowledge making him the center of attention at any gathering. Cordelia was immediately drawn to Thaddeus's sophisticated aura. They spent the evening in animated conversation about emerging artists and the latest trends in interior design. When Thaddeus casually mentioned being unattached and open to new experiences, Cordelia felt a spark of excitement. She relayed her encounter to Remington that night, watching his eyes light up as she described Thaddeus. They agreed that he might be the perfect candidate for their exploration. Remington encouraged Cordelia to nurture the connection, his excitement palpable. Over the next few weeks, Cordelia and Thaddeus met for coffee several times, ostensibly to discuss potential collaborations between his gallery and her design firm. Each time, Cordelia returned home to regale Remington with stories of their encounters, stoking the flames of his fantasy. Finally, after a particularly flirtatious meeting, Cordelia decided it was time to broach the subject with Thaddeus. To her surprise and delight, he was intrigued by the proposition. He admitted to having participated in similar arrangements before and understood the delicacy required. With Thaddeus on board, the stage was set for the Harlows to turn fantasy into reality. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change their lives. The night of the first encounter arrived with a mix of nervous energy and excited anticipation. Remington and Cordelia had spent weeks planning every detail, from the ambient lighting in their bedroom to the bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Thaddeus arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking dashing in a tailored charcoal suit. He brought with him a bouquet of exotic flowers for Cordelia and a rare bottle of scotch for Remington, a gesture that impressed them both with its thoughtfulness. The evening began in the living room with drinks and light conversation. Thaddeus regaled them with stories from the art world, his charisma on full display. Cordelia, dressed in a slinky black dress, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with increasing frequency. Remington watched from his armchair, a tumbler of scotch in hand, his heart racing with every interaction between his wife and their guest. As the night progressed and the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere grew charged with sexual tension. Finally, with a meaningful look at Remington, Cordelia took Thaddeus by the hand and led him upstairs. In the bedroom, Remington settled into a corner armchair as Cordelia and Thaddeus began to kiss passionately. When Thaddeus and Cordelia finally fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined, Remington felt a potent mix of arousal and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. The encounter itself was intense and passionate. Remington watched, transfixed, as his fantasy played out before his eyes. The reality was more visceral, more overwhelming than he had imagined. Afterwards, as they all lay spent and silent, Remington felt a complex swirl of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. His long-held fantasy had been realized, but there was also a nagging sense of unease, a feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Thaddeus left shortly after, with promises to stay in touch. As Remington and Cordelia lay in bed, discussing the evening's events in hushed, excited tones, neither could have predicted how this first encounter would set the stage for the tragedy to come. They had opened Pandora's box, and there would be no closing it again. Encouraged by the success of their first foray into cuckolding, they eagerly arranged more meetings with Thaddeus. What had started as a monthly indulgence quickly became then weekly. Each encounter seemed to push the boundaries further, with Thaddeus staying longer, the sessions growing more intense and intimate. Remington's role began to evolve as well. Cordelia said in an interview that he was initially content to watch from afar. He found himself drawn closer to the action. Sometimes he would join in, and that the dynamics of power and control within their bedroom became increasingly complex. Outside of their encounters, Thaddeus began to integrate more into their lives. He would join them for dinner, accompany Cordelia to art exhibitions, even spend weekends at their home. His charm and wit made him a delightful companion, and the Harlows found themselves enjoying his company even when action wasn't on the agenda. As spring turned to summer, Remington's initial excitement began to give way to a gnawing sense of discomfort. He started to notice small but significant changes in Cordelia's behavior. She seemed distracted during their alone time, her mind elsewhere. She began to dress up more often, even on days when they had no plans with Thaddeus. One evening, Remington came home early from work to find Cordelia on the phone, speaking in hushed, intimate tones. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was just a client. But Remington couldn't shake the feeling that she had been talking to Thaddeus. In bed, Cordelia's passion seemed to have cooled. She was still enthusiastic during their encounters with Thaddeus, but alone with Remington, she often seemed tired or disinterested. Remington found himself initiating sex more often, only to be gently rebuffed. Remington tried to reassert control over the situation. He suggested taking a break from their arrangement, perhaps going on a vacation, just the two of them. But Cordelia seemed reluctant, always finding reasons to delay or change the subject. His work began to suffer, As he spent hours analyzing every interaction, every text message, every glance between Cordelia and Thaddeus, he started checking Cordelia's phone when she wasn't looking, scrutinizing her social media activity, even contemplating following her when she went out alone. Remington knew he was spiraling, but he felt powerless to stop it. The game he had initiated was slipping out of his control, and he was terrified of losing Cordelia. As his anxiety grew, so did his determination to put an end to the situation he had created, by any means necessary. The breaking point came on a warm July evening. Remington had planned a romantic dinner at home, hoping to reconnect with Cordelia and discuss his growing concerns. He had left work early, bought her favorite wine, and spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. But as the sun began to set and the candles burned low, Cordelia was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours ticked by, the carefully prepared food growing cold on the table. When she finally stumbled in shortly before midnight, her hair disheveled and lipstick smudged, Remington's worst fears seemed confirmed. The argument that ensued was explosive. Remington, his emotions amplified by alcohol and hours of anxious waiting, unleashed all the fears and suspicions he'd been harboring. He accused Cordelia of falling in love with Thaddeus, of making a fool of him, of destroying their marriage. Cordelia, caught off guard and defensive, initially tried to deflect. She claimed she'd lost track of time at a client meeting, that her phone had died. But faced with Remington's relentless questioning and the evidence of her appearance, she finally broke down and admitted she had been with Thaddeus. The confession hit Remington like a physical blow. He had suspected, had feared, but hearing it confirmed shattered something inside him. In that moment, all the excitement and thrill of their arrangement went away. Cordelia, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain. She loved Remington, she insisted, but Thaddeus made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She was confused, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her deepening emotions for Thaddeus. Remington, his voice low and dangerous, demanded that she end things with Thaddeus immediately. Cordelia, her own anger rising, refused. This had been Remington's idea in the first place, she argued. He couldn't dictate her feelings or control her relationships. The argument escalated, with both of them saying hurtful things they would later regret. Remington, in a moment of rage, smashed a wine glass against the wall. Cordelia, shocked by this uncharacteristic display of violence, retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. Remington spent the night on the couch, his mind racing, unable to sleep. In the days following their confrontation, a chilling calm settled over the Harlow household. Cordelia and Remington moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, the tension palpable. Cordelia spent most of her time out of the house, throwing herself into her work, and Remington suspected meeting with Thaddeus. Remington, for his part, retreated into a dark place within himself. He called in sick to work, spending his days in a haze of alcohol and paranoid thoughts. He scoured Cordelia's computer and phone for evidence of her relationship with Thaddeus, meticulously documenting every text, every call, every unexplained absence. Remington began to fantasize about confronting Thaddeus, about making him pay for destroying his marriage. At first, these were just harmless daydreams, a way to vent his frustration. But as the days wore on and Cordelia grew more distant, these fantasies took on a darker, more violent tone. One afternoon, while Cordelia was at a client meeting, Remington found himself in their garage holding the heavy wrench he used for home repairs. As he felt its weight in his hand, a chilling thought crossed his mind. It should be so easy to end this, and to eliminate the threat to his marriage once and for all. Horrified by the direction of his thoughts, Remington dropped the wrench and fled the garage. But the seed had been planted. As he paced the house, gulping down glasses of whiskey, the idea took root and grew. By the time night fell, what had started as a fleeting, horrifying thought had crystallized into a plan. August 15th dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Remington woke early, his head pounding from another night of heavy drinking, but his resolve unwavering. Today would be the day he confronted Thaddeus, the day he reclaimed control over his life and his marriage. He spent the morning in a feverish state of preparation. He showered, shaved, and dressed with meticulous care, as if preparing for an important business meeting rather than the violent confrontation he was planning. In the garage, he selected the wrench he had held days earlier, wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a nondescript gym bag. Cordelia left for work around 9 a.m., barely acknowledging Remington as she rushed out the door. As soon as she was gone, Remington got into his car and drove to Thaddeus's gallery. He parked across the street, watching as Thaddeus arrived, greeting his employees with his characteristic charm. For hours, Remington sat in his car. As closing time approached, Remington watched Thaddeus bid goodbye to his last customer and begin closing up the gallery. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With shaking hands, he grabbed the gym bag and crossed the street. Thaddeus was locking the gallery door when Remington approached. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a wary smile. "Remington," he said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Remington felt a surge of rage at Thaddeus's casual tone, as if he hadn't been destroying Remington's life for months. Without conscious thought, he swung the gym bag, catching Thaddeus off guard and sending him stumbling back against the gallery door. What followed was a blur of violence and desperation. Remington pulled out the wrench, swinging it wildly as Thaddeus tried to defend himself. But Remington was beyond reason. Every blow was fueled by months of jealousy, insecurity, and rage. When it was over, Remington stood panting over Thaddeus's motionless body, the wrench slick with blood in his trembling hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just killed a man. He had just destroyed his own life in a futile attempt to save it. Remington went through the motions of covering his tracks. He dragged Thaddeus's body into the alley behind the gallery, hiding it behind a dumpster. He wiped down the door handle and any surfaces he might have touched. Then, still in a state of shock, he drove home, the weight of his actions settling over him like a shroud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Remington pulled into his driveway, the rain washing away the blood on his hands, but doing nothing to cleanse his conscience. The hours following the murder passed in a nightmarish blur for Remington. He stumbled into the house, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of his stomach. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of his actions hit him. He had killed a man. He was a murderer. Operating on autopilot, Remington set about destroying evidence. He burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit, scrubbed the car clean, and took a shower. When Cordelia came home, Remington had composed himself enough to feign normalcy. He greeted her with forced cheerfulness, suggesting they order takeout and watch a movie. As they sat on the couch, the TV flickering unwatched, Remington's mind raced. He knew it was only a matter of time before Thaddeus's body was discovered. He needed an alibi, a story to tell when the inevitable questions came. He casually mentioned to Cordelia that he had spent the day at home catching up on work and doing some yard work. He even showed her a small cut on his hand, claiming he had nicked himself while pruning the rose bushes, a cut that had actually come from his struggle with Thaddeus. 2 days after the murder, the news broke. Thaddeus Blackwood, prominent art dealer and fixture of Portland's cultural scene, had been found dead behind his shop. The police were treating it as a homicide. Remington learned of the discovery while at work, overhearing colleagues discussing the shocking news. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands shaking so badly he had to excuse himself to the restroom. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Eliana Rossi, a veteran of the Police Bureau's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She and her team combed through Thaddeus's life, interviewing friends, family, and business associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover Thaddeus's relationship with the Harlows. Cordelia, devastated by the news of Thaddeus's death, initially tried to downplay their connection, but faced with evidence from Thaddeus's phone records and witness accounts, she eventually admitted to their affair. When the police came to interview Remington, he was prepared. He expressed shock and sadness at Thaddeus's death, acknowledging that while their arrangement had been unconventional, he had considered Thaddeus a friend. He calmly recounted his movements on the day of the murder, his story aligning perfectly with what he had told Cordelia. Detective Rossi, however, sensed something off about Remington's demeanor. His calm seemed forced, his grief a touch too performative. She made a mental note to dig deeper into his background and movements. As the investigation progressed, the police began to piece together a timeline of Thaddeus's last day. Security footage from nearby businesses showed him entering the gallery in the morning but never leaving. His last phone call had been to Cordelia, ending abruptly around closing time. The net was slowly closing around Remington. As the days turned into weeks, Cordelia's grief over Thaddeus's death deepened. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the office, avoiding the stilted silences that now characterized her home life with Remington. At first, Remington's attentiveness in the wake of the tragedy had touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to cry on. But as time passed, she began to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Cordelia found herself revisiting the events leading up to Thaddeus's death. She remembered Remington's jealousy, his desperate pleas for her to end the affair. The more she thought about it, the more a terrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. She started paying closer attention to Remington's actions, noting when he left the house, checking his browser history when he wasn't around. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but couldn't bring herself to take that final step. As her suspicions grew, so did her fear. If Remington was capable of what she was beginning to suspect, what else might he be capable of? For the first time in their marriage, Cordelia found herself afraid of her husband, unsure of the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A homeless man, known to frequent the alley behind Thaddeus's gallery, came forward with information. He claimed to have seen a man matching Remington's description entering the alley on the night of the murder, carrying a gym bag. This new lead energized the investigation. Detective Rossi and her team began to scrutinize Remington's movements more closely. They discovered traffic camera footage that contradicted his alibi, showing his car near the gallery around the time of the murder. As the evidence mounted, Remington's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, snapping at colleagues, and becoming paranoid about being followed. Cordelia, her own suspicions now seeming confirmed, began to distance herself from him, staying with a friend under the guise of needing space to grieve. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the police, armed with a search warrant, found small traces of blood in Remington's car that matched Thaddeus's DNA. They also discovered the murder weapon, the blood-stained wrench that Remington had hidden in the attic, unable to bring himself to dispose of it completely. On a rainy September morning, nearly a month after Thaddeus's death, Detective Rossi arrived at the Harlow residence with a team of officers. They found Remington sitting in the living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. As the detective read him his rights, Remington offered no resistance. In that moment, he felt an odd sense of relief. The game was over. The lies, the fear, the constant vigilance. It could all stop now. Remington Harlow's trial was brief but sensational. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, his confession a rambling account of jealousy, fantasy, and fatal obsession. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Cordelia, shattered by the revelation of her husband's actions, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She sold their house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved out of state to start a new life. The local high school in Oakville stood as a pillar of the community, shaping the minds of the town's youth for generations. It was here, in the fall of 2022, that a chilling series of events would unfold, forever shattering the town's sense of security and innocence. At the center of this harrowing tale were two individuals. Miranda Jarvis, a vibrant 18-year-old senior, was the epitome of small-town charm. With her long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, Miranda was beloved by her peers and teachers alike. She excelled in her studies, particularly in English literature, and harbored dreams of becoming a writer. Enter Mark Reynolds, a 32-year-old substitute teacher who arrived in Oakville with a mysterious past and a quiet demeanor that initially endeared him to the faculty and students. As the crisp autumn air settled over Oakville, no one could have predicted the dark storm brewing on the horizon. The story that unfolded over the following months would test the limits of human obsession, challenge the town's faith in its institutions, and leave an indelible mark on all those involved. This is the true account of how a substitute teacher's unhealthy fixation on a student spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt Oakville for years to come. Miranda Jarvis was born and raised in Oakville, the only child of James and Lucy Jarvis. Her father owned the local hardware store, while her mother worked as a nurse at the town's small hospital. From a young age, Miranda displayed a precocious intelligence and a vivid imagination that set her apart from her peers. Throughout her childhood and teenage years, Miranda's passion for literature and writing blossomed. She devoured classic novels, penned short stories, and kept a detailed journal of her thoughts and experiences. Her teachers often praised her insightful essays and creative writing pieces, predicting a bright future for the young wordsmith. Miranda's life wasn't without its challenges. In her sophomore year, her parents went through a rough patch in their marriage, leading to a brief separation. The experience deeply affected Miranda, and she channeled her emotions into her writing. Mark Reynolds' path to Oakville High School was far from conventional. Born in a bustling city on the East Coast, Mark had always been drawn to the world of literature and academia. He excelled in his studies, particularly in English and philosophy. Despite his academic achievements, Mark struggled to find his footing in the professional world. He began his career as a high school English teacher in his hometown, where he quickly gained a reputation for his engaging teaching style and deep knowledge of literature. However, after 3 years, Mark abruptly resigned from his position under mysterious circumstances. Rumors circulated about an inappropriate relationship with a student, but nothing was ever proven, and no charges were filed. Following this setback, Mark drifted from job to job, never staying in one place for too long. He worked as a copywriter, a bookstore clerk, and even tried his hand at writing a novel. But success eluded him. As the years passed, a sense of bitterness and resentment began to take root in Mark's psyche. He felt that the world had denied him the recognition and success he deserved. The crisp morning air of September 15, 2022, held no hint of the pivotal moment about to unfold within the walls of Oakville School. As students filed into Mrs. Henderson's advanced English literature class, a buzz of curiosity filled the room. Their regular teacher was out on maternity leave, and today they would meet their long-term substitute. Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the classroom. He introduced himself with a quiet confidence. As he began to discuss the semester's curriculum, focusing on Gothic literature, many students found themselves drawn in by his evident passion for the subject. It was during this introduction that Mark's eyes first fell on Miranda Jarvis, seated in the second row, her hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Miranda listened with rapt attention. When Mark posed a question about the themes in Edgar Allan Poe's works, Miranda's hand shot up, and she offered an insightful analysis that caught the substitute teacher off guard. Mark, impressed by her eloquence, engaged Miranda in a brief discussion about Poe's use of symbolism. As they talked, he noticed the spark of intelligence in her green eyes, the way she articulated her thoughts with a maturity beyond her years. For a moment, Mark felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of intellectual discourse with a kindred spirit. As the class progressed, Mark found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Miranda. He called on her often, each time feeling a small surge of excitement at her thoughtful responses. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Miranda lingered behind, approaching Mark's desk with a copy of her favorite Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. They engaged in a brief but animated discussion about the story's Gothic elements and psychological undertones. As Miranda turned to leave, she smiled warmly at Mark, thanking him for the engaging class. Mark watched her go, a strange mix of emotions stirring within him: admiration, intrigue, and something darker that he couldn't quite name. That night, as Mark sat alone in his rented room, his thoughts kept drifting back to Miranda. He told himself it was merely the excitement of finding a promising student, someone who shared his passion for literature. But deep down, in a part of his psyche he dared not examine too closely, Mark knew that something had shifted. The seed of obsession had been planted, and it would soon grow into a twisted, all-consuming force that would change everything. In the weeks following that first encounter, Mark Reynolds' fixation on Miranda Jarvis grew at an alarming rate. Mark found himself looking forward to his advanced English literature class with an intensity that both thrilled and unsettled him. As September gave way to October, Mark's behavior began to change in subtle but significant ways. He started arriving at school earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of Miranda in the hallways. He lingered in the teacher's lounge, eavesdropping on conversations about students, his ears perking up at any mention of her name. Mark's nights were increasingly consumed by thoughts of Miranda. He pored over her essays, reading and rereading them long after he had finished grading. He began to imagine conversations with her, picturing scenarios where they could interact outside of class. In his mind, Miranda understood him in a way no one else ever had. One evening, while grading papers, Mark came across a personal essay Miranda had written about her aspirations to become a writer. The raw honesty and vulnerability in her words struck a chord deep within him. That night, He crossed a line he had never dared to before. He searched for Miranda on social media. Mark spent hours scrolling through Miranda's public posts, absorbing every detail of her life outside of school. He learned about her favorite books, her hobbies, the cafes she frequented with her friends. Each new piece of information fed his growing obsession, making him feel closer to her. As his fixation intensified, Mark's teaching began to suffer. He would lose his train of thought mid-lecture, distracted by Miranda's presence. Other students noticed his frequent glances in her direction, the way his voice would soften when addressing her. Whispers and giggles sometimes rippled through the classroom. But Mark was oblivious to everything except Miranda. Outside of school, Mark's life began to revolve around his obsession. He started frequenting the local library where Miranda volunteered, pretending to browse books while watching her from afar. He would drive past her house on his way home, his heart racing at the thought of catching a glimpse of her through a window. Mark knew on some level that his behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. There were moments of clarity when he would be struck by the magnitude of his obsession, and he would resolve to put it behind him. But these moments were fleeting, quickly overwhelmed by the intoxicating pull of his fixation on Miranda. As October drew to a close, Mark's obsession reached a fever pitch. He began to fantasize about a future with Miranda, convincing himself that she must feel the same connection he did. The line between reality and his twisted imagination blurred, setting the stage for the disturbing events that were about to unfold. The first truly alarming incident occurred on a chilly November afternoon. Miranda had stayed after class to discuss a paper with Mark, unaware of the tempest brewing within her teacher. As she gathered her things to leave, Mark impulsively reached out and touched her hand, ostensibly to take the paper she was handing him. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a jolt through Mark's system. Miranda, startled by the unexpected touch, quickly withdrew her hand. She noticed a strange intensity in Mark's eyes that made her uncomfortable. Mumbling a hasty goodbye, she hurried out of the classroom, leaving Mark standing there, his hand still tingling from the brief contact. That evening, Miranda confided in her best friend Lily about the odd interaction. While Lily brushed it off as nothing serious, Miranda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left her with. She resolved to be more cautious around Mr. Reynolds, but didn't want to make a big deal out of what could have been an innocent mistake. Mark, on the other hand, spent the night reliving that moment of contact. In his mind, it became a significant event, a sign that his feelings for Miranda were reciprocated. 2 weeks after the hand-touching incident, Mark's behavior took an even more concerning turn. During lunch period, he overheard Miranda telling a friend about a poetry reading at a local bookstore that evening. Unable to resist the temptation, Mark decided to attend. That night, he sat in the back of the dimly lit bookstore, watching as Miranda and her friends arrived. Throughout the reading, Mark's eyes never left Miranda. He observed every laugh, every thoughtful nod, every whispered comment to her friends. In his mind, he was sharing the experience with her, part of her world. As the event ended and people began to leave, Miranda spotted Mark. Surprise and a flicker of unease crossed her face. She approached him hesitantly, asking if he had enjoyed the reading. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled through a response, his usual eloquence deserting him. Miranda quickly excused herself, visibly uncomfortable. As she left with her friends, Mark overheard her whispering, "He's everywhere lately. It's kind of creepy." The words hit Mark like a physical blow, but instead of serving as a wake-up call, they only intensified his obsession. The situation reached a critical point in early December. Miranda had been avoiding staying after class and tried to minimize her interactions with Mark. Frustrated and increasingly desperate, Mark made a decision that would irreversibly cross the line. Using the emergency contact information from the school records, Mark obtained Miranda's home address. One evening, he drove to her house, parking down the street. He sat there for hours, watching the Jarvis residence, imagining Miranda inside going about her evening routine. As luck would have it, Miranda stepped out to take out the trash. When she spotted Mark's car, recognition dawned on her face, quickly followed by fear. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Panicked, Mark drove away, his mind racing. He knew he had gone too far, but he couldn't stop himself. The next day at school, Miranda was absent. When she returned the following day, she looked pale and avoided eye contact with Mark. Unbeknownst to Mark, Miranda had reported the incident to her parents and the school principal. An investigation was quietly launched, but before any action could be taken, the situation would take a dramatic and tragic turn. The morning of December 15, 2022, dawned cold and gray in Oakville. As families across town began their daily routines, Lucy Jarvis knocked on her daughter's bedroom door, calling out that breakfast was ready. When she received no response, Lucy opened the door expecting to find Miranda still asleep. Instead, she was met with an empty, undisturbed bed. Panic quickly set in as Lucy and James Jarvis searched their home, calling Miranda's name. Her car was still in the driveway, her phone left on her nightstand. There was no sign of forced entry, no note left behind. It was as if Miranda had simply vanished into thin air. The Jarvis immediately called the police, and within hours the quiet town of Oakville was transformed into a hive of activity. Police cars patrolled the streets, and search parties were organized to comb through nearby woods and parks. As the search for Miranda Jarvis entered its second week, the Oakville Police Department's investigation shifted into high gear. Detective Lucy Reeves, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took the lead. Her first order of business was to re-interview everyone in Miranda's life, starting with her closest friends and family. Lily Thompson recounted to Detective Reeves the growing unease Miranda had expressed about Mr. Reynolds' behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She mentioned the incident at the poetry reading and Miranda's discomfort with Mr. Reynolds' increasing presence in her life. On December 23rd, Detective Reeves brought Mark Reynolds in for formal questioning. In the stark interrogation room of the police station, Mark sat across from Reeves, his usual composure noticeably shaken. Detective Reeves began the interview casually, asking about Mark's background and his time at Oakville School. As the questions turned to his relationship with Miranda, Mark's responses became increasingly evasive. He denied any inappropriate behavior, insisting that his interest in Miranda was purely academic. But when confronted with evidence of his presence outside Miranda's house the night before her disappearance, Mark's facade began to crack. He stammered through an explanation about wanting to drop off some books for Miranda to read over the winter break. But his story was full of inconsistencies. As the interrogation wore on, Detective Reeves noticed Mark's right hand constantly fidgeting with something in his pocket. When asked to empty his pockets, Mark hesitated before reluctantly pulling out a delicate silver charm bracelet. With a sinking feeling, Reeves recognized it as the bracelet Miranda was wearing in the most recent photos her parents had provided. Mark's possession of Miranda's personal item was damning. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of involvement in Miranda's disappearance. As he was led away in handcuffs, Mark maintained his innocence, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and something darker that sent chills down Detective Reeves' spine. The news of Mark Reynolds' arrest sent shockwaves through Oakville. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, intellectual substitute teacher with the disturbing allegations against him. Parents demanded answers from the school board about how such a person had been allowed to teach their children. As the investigation continued, police executed a search warrant on Mark's rented room. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives discovered a journal filled with rambling entries about Miranda. The evidence painted a chilling picture of Mark's deteriorating mental state and his unhealthy fixation on Miranda. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Where was Miranda Jarvis? Despite Mark's arrest and the damning evidence against him, there was still no trace of the missing girl. One entry, dated December 14th, caught Detective Reeves' attention. In it, Mark wrote about a special place where he and Miranda could be together forever, away from the judgmental eyes of the world. The entry was vague, but it mentioned an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. Acting on this lead, police conducted a thorough search of abandoned buildings in the area. On December 27th, their efforts paid off when they discovered an old dilapidated cabin deep in the woods outside Oakville. As officers approached the cabin, they noticed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud and a faint smell of smoke from the chimney. With hearts racing, the police team breached the cabin. Inside, they found evidence of someone living there recently. Food wrappers, a makeshift bed, and most disturbingly, several of Miranda's personal items scattered around the room. But there was no sign of Miranda herself. Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds remained in custody, stubbornly maintaining his innocence despite the mounting evidence against him. During interrogations, he alternated between proclaiming his love for Miranda and insisting that he was being framed. His erratic behavior led the district attorney to order a psychological evaluation. Volunteers joined the police in searching the woods, hoping to find any trace of Miranda. In a surprising turn of events, on December 30th, Lily Thompson came forward with new information. Trembling and visibly distressed, she revealed to Detective Reeves that she had been withholding crucial details out of fear and misplaced loyalty. Philly recounted a conversation she had with Miranda just days before her disappearance. Miranda had confided in her about a secret online relationship she had been having with someone she met in a writing forum. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. While Mark Reynolds remained a person of interest, the police now had to consider the possibility that Miranda's disappearance was connected to this mysterious online figure. The IP address used by the user in the writing forum was traced back to a computer in the Oakville School Library. Cross-referencing the times of the online interactions with the school's records, Reeves found that they coincided perfectly with Mark Reynolds' free periods. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Mark hadn't just been obsessing over Miranda from afar. He had been actively manipulating her, creating a false persona to gain her trust and lure her into a meeting. Armed with this new information, Reeves confronted Mark in another intense interrogation. Initially, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as Reeves laid out the evidence piece by piece, Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a chilling moment, Mark's demeanor suddenly shifted. Gone was the nervous, protesting teacher, replaced by a cold, calculating individual. With an unsettling calmness, he began to reveal the full extent of his deception. Mark admitted to creating the online persona months earlier. Long before he came to Oakville, he had been grooming Miranda online, gaining her trust and fueling her dreams of becoming a writer. It was just after dawn when a search dog picked up a scent. Following the dog's lead, rescuers pushed deeper into the forest, hope and dread warring in their hearts. As they crested a small hill, they spotted a flash of color against the dull winter landscape: Miranda's bright blue jacket. Miranda Jarvis was found huddled in the hollow of an old oak tree, cold, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive. As Miranda recovered in the hospital, surrounded by her overjoyed parents and a protective police presence, the full story of her ordeal came to light. She recounted how she had agreed to meet mysterious online user at the cabin, believing it to be a surprise arranged by a supportive mentor. The shock and terror she felt upon discovering Mark's true identity drove her to flee into the woods, where she had been wandering and hiding for over 2 weeks, surviving on stream water and whatever edible plants she could recognize. The aftermath of Miranda's rescue and Mark's arrest was far-reaching. The school faced intense scrutiny over its hiring practices and student protection policies. Several administrators resigned in the wake of the scandal, and the school board implemented stringent new background check procedures for all staff. Mark was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, stalking, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, without the possibility of parole. For Miranda and her family, the road to recovery was long and challenging. Miranda underwent extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of her experience. She found solace in writing, using her journal to process her emotions, and eventually turning her story into a powerful memoir that would go on to help other survivors of stalking and abuse. As for Oakville, the town would never be quite the same. The innocence of small-town life had been shattered, replaced by a wary vigilance. Yet in the face of this tragedy, the community had come together, demonstrating the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. The case of Miranda Jarvis and Mark Reynolds serves as a chilling reminder of the dark undercurrents that can exist beneath the surface of even the most seemingly idyllic communities. It highlights the vulnerability of young people in an increasingly connected world and the insidious ways in which predators can manipulate and exploit their victims. Donald and Violet Dawson were the golden couple of Riverview. They moved into their elegant 2-story house on Maple Street 5 years ago, quickly becoming popular in the tight-knit community. Donald's wit and charm made him a favorite at neighborhood gatherings, while Violet's warm smile and artistic talent endeared her to everyone she met. Together they hosted barbecues, attended charity events, and were often seen jogging together in the mornings, embodying the image of marital bliss. Donald's career as a financial analyst was thriving. He had a keen eye for investments and was climbing the corporate ladder with impressive speed. His colleagues admired his work ethic and sharp mind, often turning to him for advice on financial matters. Violet, on the other hand, ran a successful freelance graphic design business from home. Her designs were in high demand, and she had a loyal client base that appreciated her creativity and attention to detail. Their social circle included other young professionals and couples who often praised their relationship. They seemed to complement each other perfectly. Donald was the outgoing, ambitious partner, while Violet provided a nurturing and supportive presence. They had no children, but they doted on their golden retriever, Max, treating him like their own child. To anyone looking in from the outside, Donald and Violet had it all. But as the months turned into years, small cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. The first signs of trouble were the minor arguments over mundane household matters. Violet would complain about Donald leaving his clothes on the floor or not doing his share of the chores. Donald, in turn, would criticize Violet for her spending habits or the way she managed her time. These disagreements were brushed off as normal marital spats, but they hinted at deeper issues lurking beneath the surface. Their friends noticed the change but didn't think much of it. After all, every couple had their moments of discord. However, those who spent more time with the Dawsons sensed a growing tension. Violet's laughter seemed more forced, and Donald's affectionate gestures appeared increasingly performative. Yet in public, they maintained their image of the perfect couple, never letting their private conflicts spill into their social life. Despite these early signs, Donald and Violet continued to present a united front. They celebrated anniversaries with lavish dinners and weekend getaways, posted loving messages on social media, and attended couples therapy sessions to work on their issues. But behind closed doors, the fights grew more frequent and intense, setting the stage for the dark and twisted events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As the months went by, the arguments between Donald and Violet became more frequent and intense. The issues that once seemed trivial now escalated into full-blown fights. Donald's controlling behavior began to surface, and Violet's frustration grew with each passing day. The idyllic image of their marriage was slowly disintegrating, revealing a toxic dynamic that neither of them could escape. Donald's control over Violet extended beyond the household chores. He began dictating how she should dress, whom she could meet, and even how she should spend her free time. Violet, once an independent and confident woman, found herself constantly walking on eggshells trying to avoid Donald's wrath. She started to withdraw from her friends, making excuses for not attending social events or meeting for coffee. Her friends noticed the change, but were unsure how to approach the subject. One evening, during a dinner party at their home, the tension between Donald and Violet was palpable. Violet accidentally spilled wine on the tablecloth, and Donald's reaction was swift and harsh. He berated her in front of their guests, his face contorted with anger. The room fell silent, the awkwardness thick in the air. Violet apologized meekly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Their friends exchanged uneasy glances, but tried to carry on with the evening, not wanting to exacerbate the situation. After the guests left, Donald continued his tirade. Violet tried to defend herself, but her words only seemed to fuel his anger. It was during these moments that Violet glimpsed the darker side of Donald, a side that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The man she had once admired and loved was now a source of fear and anxiety. Violet confided in her sister Rachel about the growing issues in her marriage. Rachel was shocked to hear about Donald's behavior, as he had always been charming and respectful around her. She urged Violet to consider leaving him, but Violet was hesitant. She still loved Donald and hoped that their issues could be resolved through therapy and open communication. Donald, on the other hand, dismissed the idea of therapy. He believed that Violet was overreacting and that their problems were normal marital issues. He continued to exert control over every aspect of Violet's life, from her work to her friendships. Violet felt increasingly isolated and trapped, her once vibrant personality dimming under the weight of Donald's dominance. The unraveling of Donald and Violet's marriage was rooted in their pasts, hidden traumas and manipulative tendencies that had remained buried until now. Donald's need for control stemmed from his childhood, where he grew up in a household dominated by his tyrannical father. Witnessing his mother's submissiveness and his father's oppressive behavior, Donald internalized the notion that control was synonymous with love and respect. Violet's past was marked by a different kind of trauma. She had been in an abusive relationship during her college years, which left her with deep emotional scars. She had worked hard to rebuild her life, seeking therapy and finding solace in her career. Meeting Donald had seemed like a fresh start, a chance to leave her painful past behind. But as the years went by, the echoes of her past trauma resurfaced, exacerbated by Donald's controlling behavior. Their marriage, which had once seemed like a partnership of equals, transformed into a battleground of wills. Donald's manipulative tendencies became more pronounced, and Violet's hidden traumas were exploited. Donald would use Violet's past against her, belittling her experiences and making her feel unworthy of love and respect. He manipulated her emotions, alternating between affectionate gestures and harsh criticisms, leaving Violet constantly second-guessing herself. Violet's attempts to seek help from friends or family were often thwarted by Donald's interference. He would charm her friends, making them believe that Violet was exaggerating or being overly sensitive. He isolated her from those who could offer support, ensuring that she remained dependent on him. Violet's cries for help were met with skepticism, as Donald's outward charm and charisma masked his true nature. The twisted game of manipulation and control escalated over time. Donald would gaslight Violet, making her doubt her own perceptions and memories. He would hide her belongings, then accuse her of being forgetful. He would criticize her appearance and decisions, undermining her confidence. Violet, caught in this web of psychological abuse, felt her sense of reality slipping away. Despite the escalating abuse, Violet clung to the hope that things could change. She believed that if she just tried harder, if she just loved Donald enough, things would go back to the way they were. She blamed herself for the growing tension, convinced that she was the problem. Donald reinforced this belief, using it to tighten his grip on her. The turning point in Donald and Violet's tumultuous relationship came one night during an argument that escalated beyond verbal altercations. It started as a typical disagreement over household chores, but the tension quickly mounted. Donald's face twisted with anger as he accused Violet of being lazy and ungrateful. Violet, her patience worn thin, snapped back, telling Donald that she was tired of his constant criticism and control. The argument spiraled out of control, with both of them shouting and hurling accusations. Donald's anger boiled over, and for the first time he struck Violet. The force of the blow sent her reeling, her cheek stinging from the impact. The room fell silent, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Donald, momentarily stunned by his own actions, quickly regained his composure and began to apologize profusely. He promised it would never happen again, blaming the stress from work and the pressures of life. Violet, shocked and hurt, didn't know how to respond. She had never imagined that their arguments would turn physical. Despite her fear, a part of her still clung to the hope that Donald could change. She accepted his apology, convincing herself that it was a one-time incident, an unfortunate outburst that wouldn't be repeated. But the physical abuse didn't stop. Over the following weeks, Donald's outbursts became more frequent and violent. Violet tried to hide the bruises, making excuses for her injuries when friends or colleagues asked. She became adept at covering up the signs of abuse, using makeup to mask the bruises and long sleeves to hide the marks. Her once vibrant spirit was replaced by a shadow of her former self, her eyes reflecting a deep-seated fear and sadness. In a desperate attempt to break free from the cycle of abuse, Violet confided in her closest friend, Kate. She told Kate about the physical violence and Donald's controlling behavior, hoping that sharing her secret would give her the strength to leave. Kate was horrified and immediately offered her support, urging Violet to contact a domestic violence hotline and seek help. Violet took Kate's advice and called the hotline, speaking to a counselor who provided her with resources and a safety plan. She started to make preparations to leave, gathering important documents and saving money in a hidden account. Violet felt a glimmer of hope, believing that she could escape the nightmare her life had become. However, Donald's control over Violet was stronger than she anticipated. He grew suspicious of her actions, noticing the small changes in her behavior and the secretive nature of her movements. His paranoia intensified, and he began to monitor her closely, checking her phone and following her when she left the house. Violet's attempts to break free were thwarted at every turn as Donald tightened his grip on her life. The breaking point came when Violet tried to leave one night, only to be caught by Donald as she was sneaking out of the house with a suitcase. Enraged, Donald dragged her back inside, accusing her of betrayal and threatening her with dire consequences if she ever tried to leave again. Violet, terrified and defeated, realized that escaping Donald's control was more difficult than she had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Donald's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed surveillance cameras in the house, monitored Violet's every move, and cut off her access to the outside world. Violet felt like a prisoner in her own home, her every action scrutinized and controlled. The glimmer of hope that had once sustained her was extinguished, replaced by a sense of despair and resignation. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached a dangerous new level, with Donald's paranoia and violence threatening to consume them both. Despite the overwhelming fear and isolation, Violet continued to hold on to a sliver of hope. She documented the abuse in a hidden journal, detailing each incident with meticulous care. One night, after a particularly violent argument, Violet decided she couldn't take it anymore. The fight had started over a minor issue, Donald accusing her of not cooking dinner to his liking, but it quickly escalated. Donald's rage was uncontrollable, and he beat Violet until she was barely conscious. As she lay on the floor, battered and bleeding, Violet made a silent vow to escape no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Violet meticulously planned her escape. She reached out to Kate through a coded message, arranging a time and place to meet. Kate, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to help without hesitation. On the night of their planned escape, Violet waited until Donald was asleep before making her move. She quietly gathered her pre-packed bag and slipped out of the house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the meeting spot, every shadow and sound amplifying her fear. Kate was waiting at the designated spot, her car idling and ready to go. Violet climbed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she clutched her bag. Kate didn't waste any time, driving away from the house as quickly as possible. The sense of relief Violet felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that her freedom was still fragile. They drove to a nearby town, where Kate had arranged for Violet to stay at a women's shelter. The shelter provided a safe haven, a place where Violet could begin to rebuild her life without fear of Donald's retribution. The staff at the shelter were supportive and understanding, helping Violet navigate the legal process of obtaining a restraining order and pressing charges against Donald. For the first time in years, Violet felt a glimmer of hope. She was surrounded by people who believed her, who validated her experiences, and provided her with the support she desperately needed. The journey to recovery was daunting, but Violet was determined to reclaim her life and break free from the cycle of abuse. However, Donald was not willing to let go so easily. When he discovered Violet's absence, his rage knew no bounds. He used every resource at his disposal to track her down, refusing to accept that she had escaped his control. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached its final, deadly stage, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have tragic consequences. Violet had been staying at the women's shelter for a few weeks, slowly beginning to heal and regain her sense of self. The staff and other residents provided a supportive community, helping her navigate the complexities of her situation. She had obtained a restraining order against Donald, and the shelter had taken measures to ensure her safety. However, Donald's obsession with Violet only grew stronger in her absence. He scoured social media to track her down. His need to control her had reached a dangerous level, driven by a toxic mix of anger, jealousy, and possessiveness. Donald's paranoia and determination to reclaim Violet culminated in a meticulously planned confrontation. On the night of June 27th, Donald finally discovered Violet's location. He had been stalking the shelter for days, watching and waiting for the right moment. When he saw Violet leave the shelter to run an errand, he followed her, careful to remain undetected. Violet was unaware of his presence, her mind occupied with thoughts of her new life and the steps she needed to take to move forward. As Violet returned to the shelter, she felt a strange unease, a sense that something was not right. She quickened her pace, her heart racing as she approached the shelter's entrance. Before she could reach the door, Donald appeared, blocking her path. The look in his eyes was a chilling combination of rage and determination. Donald's voice was low and menacing as he demanded that Violet come with him. Violet tried to remain calm, her voice shaking as she told him to leave and that she had a restraining order against him. But Donald was beyond reason. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful, and started dragging her towards his car. Violet struggled, screaming for help, but the street was deserted and her cries went unanswered. In a desperate bid to break free, Violet managed to pull out her phone and dial 911. The call connected, but before she could speak, Donald slapped the phone out of her hand, sending it crashing to the ground. Violet's panic intensified as she realized the severity of the situation. Donald's anger was palpable, his grip on her arm unrelenting. In a final desperate attempt to escape, Violet kicked Donald and tried to run. But Donald was faster and stronger. He caught up to her and, in a fit of rage, began to beat her mercilessly. Violet's cries for help echoed through the empty street, but no one came to her aid. Donald's fury was uncontrollable, and he didn't stop until Violet lay motionless on the ground. As the reality of what he had done sank in, Donald's rage gave way to panic. He looked around, realizing that the commotion could attract attention. He quickly dragged Violet's body to his car, his mind racing as he tried to think of a plan. He knew he needed to get rid of the evidence and cover his tracks. Donald drove to a remote area outside of town, a place he knew would be deserted at this hour. He put his hand on her neck. There was no pulse. He carried her into the woods, his heart pounding as he dug a shallow grave. He placed her body in the grave, covering it with dirt and debris. Donald's hands shook as he worked, the reality of his actions hitting him with full force. He knew there was no turning back. After burying Violet, Donald returned to his car, his mind racing with thoughts of how to cover his tracks. He disposed of her belongings, including her phone, and cleaned the car meticulously, trying to eliminate any traces of evidence. Donald knew that the police would come looking for him, but he was confident that he could outsmart them. Back at the shelter, the staff discovered Violet's absence and the signs of a struggle near the entrance. They immediately called the police, reporting her missing and providing details of her situation. The police launched an investigation, quickly identifying Donald as the prime suspect. The investigation was swift and thorough. Donald's history of abuse, the restraining order, and his known obsession with Violet made him the obvious suspect. The police tracked his movements, interviewed witnesses, and gathered evidence. It didn't take long for them to piece together the events of that fateful night. Friends and family were interviewed, providing crucial insights into the dynamics of Donald and Violet's relationship. Kate, Violet's closest friend, recounted the numerous times Violet had confided in her about the abuse. She shared the details of Violet's escape plan and their coded messages, revealing the extent of Violet's fear and desperation. Kate's testimony painted a stark contrast between the public image of the Dawsons and the dark reality behind closed doors. Rachel, Violet's sister, spoke of the early signs of trouble she had noticed in their marriage. She described Donald's controlling behavior and the gradual isolation of Violet from her family. Rachel's account of Violet's past trauma and her struggles to rebuild her life added another layer to the understanding of the abuse she had endured. During the interrogation, Donald initially tried to maintain his innocence, but the weight of the evidence was too great. His story unraveled under the pressure, and he eventually confessed to the murder. He described the events of that night with chilling detail, his voice devoid of remorse or empathy. Donald's confession confirmed the police's findings, solidifying the case against him. The community of Riverview was shocked by the revelations. The couple they had once admired and envied had been hiding a dark and twisted reality. The news of Violet's murder and the details of the abuse she had suffered sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. The unraveling of Donald and Violet's relationship, from the seemingly perfect marriage to the tragic and violent end, served as a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse. After several days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Donald was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the community of Riverview could begin to heal. The murder of Violet Dawson was a tragic and heartbreaking event that left an indelible mark on the community of Riverview. The seemingly perfect couple, whose public life had been the envy of many, was revealed to have been hiding a dark and twisted reality.